I grabbed the bag, walked up the steps, and froze. Long before that night, carved into the door was something sharp, predictable. Leave it where you found me. I worked the evening shift at a small cafe. A chill ran through me so deep it hurt. The kind of place where locals came back to the conversation and all the way down the mountain. My world revolved around routine. When I finally reached the main highway, my hands were still shaking. Opened the shop at 3. I pulled into the served lattes to college kids and retirees. The clerk, closed up an older guy named Jim, and walked home under the glow of street lamps. You looked like you saw a ghost. He said. It wasn't glamorous, but I liked it that way. Maybe I did. My cottage sat near the edge of town, laugh it off. Tucked back behind the stretch of clock read 1:12 avoided after dark. Tina was logging orders. The house was old. A leftover from my grandparents' generation. I'm done. Creaky floors, chipped paint, and a porch that groaned under the slightest weight. I lived alone unless you counted my cat Finch, who mostly kept to himself. She turned her monitor toward me. That November night, the rain hadn't stopped you went to. Sunset. Hollow Creek. By the time I locked the cafe door, it's not in the system anymore. My jeans clung to my legs, and my umbrella had vanished after you left. The wind. There's no water. The walk home was only 20 minutes, but it felt like a mile of cold needles on my skin. The delivery receipt. When I finally reached my porch, I let out a shaky breath of relief. Ticket dated 2014. The air smelled like wet pine and earth. Under delivery address. It read, I hung my coat. Hollow Creek cabin, changed into dry abandoned after fatal accident for tea. Tina gave a low whistle. Out from his perch by the window. Weird tail flicking, eyes fixed outside. I didn't answer. What's wrong, buddy? That night I dreamed of the figure again. He didn't move. Standing in the middle of the road, I brushed it off, whispering in a voice I couldn't quite hear, probably just the sound of branches. The next day, curiosity got the better of me. I curled up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, by the library, figuring maybe there'd be something about Hollow Creek rumbled in the distance, deep and slow. The local history clerk against the windows almost found it within minutes, until I heard a microfilm printout toward me. A sound from the porch. Headline: Slow deliberate family killed in delivery crash. Under the weight of something heavy. Never found. I muted the TV. The article dated back 10 years. 1, 2. It said a food delivery van lost control during a storm. Probably the wind. Crashed into a cabin off Hollow Creek Road. Though even saying killing the homeowner and his daughter instantly. I peeked through the driver's body was never recovered. The porch light flickered once, twice. I swallowed hard. The yard was nothing. Was his name Carlos? Water and shadows. Mrs. Lanning shook her head. When the bulb flickered back to life, David Martinez. Across the wooden planks of my porch were wet footprints. That night I sat in my van outside my apartment toward the front door, staring at the fog rolling down from the hills. My throat. My phone pinged. I stepped back from the window, every nerve in my body just a notification from the delivery app. I locked the deadbolt on the cabin. Delivery every window. Finch darted under the couch as if confirming what I already feared. My headlights flickered twice. Something wasn't right. And then came the rearview mirror. I swore I saw someone sitting in the back seat. It was soft at first. When I turned around, like someone dragging something across the glass. By Sunday, came a single I decided I couldn't ignore it. Whether it was a glitch, a prank, or something worse. That was when the kettle screamed. I had to see that place startling me so hard I almost dropped. I left early morning. Fog still heavy in the hollow of trembling fingers. The road the dispatcher's calm voice barely cut through the pounding in my ears. The GPS wouldn't even load. Ma'am, stay inside. The trees seemed closer. Officers are on the way. Like the forest was leaning in. Do not open any doors. When I reached the spot, there was no cabin. I stood frozen in the middle of my living room, eyes darting between the front and back doors. But something glinted near the ashes. For 10 long minutes, the world was nothing but thunder and silence. Still half flashing red and blue lights. I nearly dropped it when I saw my own handwriting on the sticker. They found the footprints leading off the porch and into the woods. 6427. One of them shone his flashlight over the glass near the couch. I hadn't written that. There, smeared in mud, was a single handprint. A whisper brushed my ear. I didn't sleep that night. Leave it where you found me. The next morning, bolted back to the van, but the engine refused to start. The ground was still wet. The radio crackled alive with static, but the world seemed too quiet. Through the static came a voice, like the rain had washed away all the noise. Delivery leaving only unease behind. Then silence. 2 officers came back. The van roared to life, headlights blinding for a second. Officer Hart, cutting off on their own, sat at my kitchen table. The next evening, jotting notes as I recounted every sound, every flicker, every detail. The system marked your Hollow Creek delivery as completed. He asked. Time stamped 1217A. Just the footprints. Last night. He nodded slowly. I wasn't even out for entry. You sure all doors were locked? ID? Yes, I checked twice. Paused. He exchanged a glance with his partner. Could have been a drifter. That night. We get some passing through after driving those roads. Maybe looking for shelter was out there. That explanation made sense. Too much sense. Sometimes when the fog rolls into town, I hear the faint chiming my old delivery app notification. Still, when I looked out at the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had been there wasn't just passing through. That evening, I replaced the porch lights and bought new locks. Not every unfinished task is yours to drop by with dinner. Some places and some people belong to the past. Takeout bag on the counter. And trying to deliver what was lost can trap you there too. Just tired. Curiosity may push you down dark roads for a few nights, but wisdom is knowing when to turn around. But the truth was I hadn't been fine since that handprint. Every creak in the floorboards, it's strange how quiet a city can feel when the night finally gives up trying to pretend it's alive. As I tried to sleep, I'd always liked walking home after late nights. A faint hum like static or low whispering coming from the smell of rain on pavement. I held my breath. Every sound feels sharper when the streets are empty. When I finally fell asleep near dawn, I dreamt of footprints in the rain. I was leaving my friend Caleb's apartment after helping him move furniture. 2 days later, a man came into the cafe asking for directions. He was tall, drunk, just tired, with a wet jacket. The streets around downtown were empty except for the occasional passing bus. He said to me, "It's you know where Willow Creek Road connects to Orange Lane?" Something was close to midnight when I turned down Maple Avenue. Calm, a long stretch that cut straight to my apartment, vaguely toward the north window. The air was cool. About 2 miles down, then pale clouds in front of me. He nodded, thanked me, and left. My footsteps echoed off the building. As he pushed the door open back, like I noticed the mud on his boots. Every streetlight I passed hummed like he'd walked through the same low electric my house, but halfway down the block, I told Officer Flicker about it the next day, but without proof there wasn't much they could do. He was facing away with a flashlight in my hand, slightly tilted like he was looking at something. I woke up to the sound of rain again. I slowed my pace, pretending to check my phone. This time they weren't on the porch. His clothes were dark, inside the house. Coat, maybe a hood. The first thing I did was grab from that distance. Who was hissing at the hallway. For some reason, I felt like I shouldn't call 911 again. My brain whispering so low I could barely hear myself. So I crossed to the opposite sidewalk and kept walking. Stay quiet. That's when the light stopped flickering. Officers are on the way. It went steady. Can you lock yourself in a room? I glanced back. I backed into the bedroom. He was gone. Just locked the door and crouched. I told myself he probably walked off when I wasn't looking. Heavy, deliberate. People disappear into alleyways all the time. Then came the creak of the living room floor. Still, I sped up, trying to shake the unease crawling up my spine. My phone buzzed. A few blocks later, I heard it. Footsteps silenced it immediately, afraid the noise would give me away, matching mine. And then, when I slowed, they slowed. The longest silence I'd ever known. I turned. I don't remember how long I waited before the sirens came it was, but the street was empty. When the officers entered, my reflection in a darkened shop window stared back at me. Muddy prints led halfway across the living room, nervous smile. No exit trail. You're fine, I muttered. No windows broken. Just tired. No sign of forced entry. By the time I reached my apartment building, I had almost convinced myself nothing was wrong. His face pale. I fumbled for my keys, hand shaking slightly. I heard him. That's when a voice whispered right beside my ear. He nodded slowly, as if trying to believe that I felt the breath. We'll have someone watch the area for a few days. I froze. But my house keys were already in my hand. A month later, I turned around, packed up what little I owned, and left the cottage above my door flickered twice, then load boxes into a truck. I barely slept that night. She asked. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows made my heart jump. The new bulb still flickered faintly. I laughed at myself for being weak light over the planks. Morning light has a way of soft and steady, and for a moment at least I saw the next shape standing by the tree line. Work that day dragged. When I blinked, it was gone. I work at a repair shop just outside the city. I moved into a small apartment closer to town. Fixing phones, laptops, the kind of job that's quiet enough to make you think too much. But even now, sometimes around noon when the rain starts to fall, I still think I hear it. You get home all right last night? That slow, steady creak of footsteps on old wood. Caleb. Thought I saw you talking to someone stood on my porch that night was ever caught, or if he's still out there. I had waiting for another light to flicker in the storm. When I left work that evening, it was already paranoia. I told myself to take the bus recognizing danger before your logic catches up. But somehow I ended up on the same street to tell you something is wrong. Maple Avenue, safety my mind isn't just about locks and facing the fear. It's about listening to the voice inside that whispers. Under that same street light, there was something small on the ground. My curiosity got the better of me. I crouched down and saw it was a Harry keychain. A cheap metal tag with the number 208 change your life until it does. My apartment was late August, that heavy part of summer when the air feels like a damp towel over your face. I just finished the closing shift. I'd never owned anything like that. The kind of small town place that smells like coffee and bacon no matter behind me. That night I heard faint tapping sounds. 26 years outside, still living inside the Kentucky county I'd been born in. Like someone dragging a nail slowly down the drywall to help restock the walk-in fridge. I tried to find the source but couldn't. Carol, my manager, was down with a summer cold and needed all the help she could get. With a text from an unknown number. By the time I wiped down the last table and killed the neon sign, you shouldn't have taken what's not yours. It was close to midnight. I showed the world outside felt hollowed out. He laughed. Just the buzz of insects, the hum of the highway far off, and that faint metallic taste in the air right before rain. I wanted to believe him. I deleted the message, home with second nature stuck with me like cut down to Ridge Road. That evening, when I got home, I noticed something office and followed the back road. My front door was on the tree line until I was sure I'd locked it that morning. Where my little house stolen, but the air felt disturbed. No streetlights, like someone had stood in the middle of my living room for hours, breathing. The steady beam of my headlights carving through it. I decided to take a shower. I was humming along, trying to watch away the radio when my engine coughed. The steam fogged up the mirror, and as I wiped it with my hand, I froze. Then the power died like somebody had pulled a plug. Or finger streaks. The dashboard written in the condensation, and the car coasted to a stop beside a stretch of overgrown mailboxes. Heart racing. Come on,
My apartment door was locked
turning the key
now.
again.
The
Click,
deadbolt
click.
secure.
How the
Nothing.
hell could anyone have been
It was the
inside?
kind of silence
I
that
grabbed
makes
the
you aware of
keychain
your
from
own
my
heartbeat.
pocket and threw it in the trash.
I pulled my phone out
That
of my
night,
bag. No signal.
I barely blinked.
I lifted it
sitting
toward
on the
the
couch with
windshield.
the
Still
TV
nothing.
volume low.
Great.
Around 1 a.m.,
I told
my
myself
bathroom
I'd
light
wait a
turned
few
on by
minutes.
itself.
Cars
Then,
pass this road sometimes.
that voice again,
Mostly
low,
locals
steady,
heading home from late
like it was
shifts coming
like
from
mine.
just behind
But
my
15
ear.
minutes went by and not a single
You
pair
dropped
of
something.
headlights appeared. The next day,
Then
I took
from
a different
behind me, I
route to
saw
work,
them.
avoiding
Two
Maple
circles
Avenue
of yellow
entirely.
light growing larger.
But fear doesn't
The
care
truck
about
moving
directions
slow.
and it follows.
Relief
At the
flooded
shop,
me,
my
though
boss
part of me
asked if I
stayed
was
tight in the
okay.
chest.
You look like
The
hell,
pickup
Daniel.
pulled alongside my
Didn't
car.
sleep, I said.
Engine rumbling
Somebody's
deep
been
and
screwing
uneven.
with me.
The driver
He
rolled
chuckled.
down his window.
City
A
life
man
will
in
do
his
that.
50s maybe with a
When I got home, I
sun-creased
found an
face and the
envelope
easy
taped to
drawl
my
of
door.
someone used to strangers.
Inside was a photo of me.
You all right
Walking
there,
home
miss?
last night, my
He
face
called
half
out.
lit by headlights.
I think so, I said,
On the
forcing
back,
a
still
smile.
got your keys?
Car died
That
on me.
night, I couldn't
I'm
stay
trying
in
to
the
get a
apartment.
tow, but I
No
packed a
service,
bag
and
and
he
drove
nodded.
to Caleb's.
Figures.
He laughed at my
These
panic,
roads
but
will
let me
trap
trap
a
a signal
signal couch.
faster than they trap heat.
Around 2 a.m.,
I got a
shop
shot
not
I was
far
half
from
asleep.
here if
I
you
heard
want.
footsteps
Could
in the
tow you up
hallway
there and
outside
take
his
a look.
apartment. The way he
Slow.
said it, too easy,
Heavy.
too practiced,
Then,
made something shift inside me.
the sound of
I
something
couldn't
metal
explain it, but
scraping
his
across
tone
the
felt
floor.
rehearsed. Caleb's
I
dog started
appreciate it,
whining.
I said carefully. The
The
next
next
morning,
morning,
Caleb's
family
front
nearby.
doorknob had a fresh
They'll come
scratch
get
mark
me.
on it.
Like
He
the
leaned
key
a little
had been
out of the
dragged
window,
across the
peering
metal.
at the empty road.
A week
Family
later, I
out here?
finally decided to
Yeah,
report
I
everything
lied.
to the police.
A pause stretched between
The
us.
officer at the desk
Then he
listened
smiled,
politely,
small,
but didn't
polite.
write much.
The kind of
Sounds
smile
like a
that doesn't
prank, he
reach the
said.
eyes.
You sure you're not
All right,
imagining
then.
things? You take care.
But that night proved I
He drove
wasn't.
off slowly.
When I
Tires
got
crunching
home, my
gravel.
apartment door was
I
wide
watched
open.
until the red glow
Inside,
of his
every light
taillights
was
vanished
off,
around the bend,
except the one under the
I
flickering
exhaled.
street light outside
My
my
hands
window.
were trembling, but I laughed under
It was
my breath.
strobing in that same
See,
uneven
Sophia?
rhythm I
Not
remembered.
every stranger's a
and
killer.
beneath it through the glass,
That's what I
saw
told
him.
myself.
The
Until
man,
I saw the headlights
standing
again.
perfectly still,
The
face
same
hidden
truck.
by his hood.
Same
In
yellow
his hand, he
lights.
held the Kelmy keychain wound the one I'd
At
thrown
first,
away.
I thought maybe he'd realized
called
I needed
911
real help
before
and
they
turned
could
around.
answer. The light went out.
But the longer he
Total
sat there,
darkness.
engine
Then,
idling, lights
whispered
trained on the
inches
back of
from
my
my
car,
ear.
the faster my pulse kicked.
You dropped something.
Okay, I whispered.
When the
No
cops
panic,
arrived,
just
they
think.
found my apartment
I locked
empty.
the doors. The window was
My
open,
fingers
curtains
brushed the
swaying,
keys still in the
no
ignition.
footprint starting
No
the
sign
car
of
wasn't
forced
an
entry.
option. Just a single
battery was
keychain
gone.
lying in the middle of
The
the
truck
floor.
door creaked open.
I moved
I
out the
froze.
next morning.
Through the rearview
To
mirror,
this
I
day,
saw a
whenever
shape.
I pass an empty
Tall,
street under a
broad-shouldered
flickering
step
light
out into the glow of the
I
headlights.
still hear that voice.
He didn't
Not
crawl
every
out this
shadow
time.
hides evil. Didn't
But
wave.
not every act of
Just
reason
stood there
keeps you
staring
safe.
toward my car. Fear is
I grabbed
often
my
your
phone
body's
again,
way of
still
telling
no
you what
service.
logic refuses
My
to
breath
accept.
hitched.
And I knew
Always
sitting there
trust
was
your
the worst
instincts,
thing I could
especially
do.
when everything looks normal.
I remembered my dad
The danger
teaching me
you
to drive
ignore
when I
once
was 16. Might be the one that never lets you go. If something feels wrong, trust it, he'd said. The road will always be there. You just get yourself out first. So I did. I pushed the door open
I've been
quietly,
driving long haul for
grabbed
close
my
to
bag
20
and
years,
slipped
and
into
the
the
road still
darkness.
feels like home to me.
The tall grass brushed my
I'm
jeans
used
as
to
I
the
ran
hum
toward
of
the
tires
woods.
on asphalt.
Behind me came
The
a
steady
shout,
drone
faint
but
but
sharp.
sharp.
Hey,
The
you
way
don't
the
have to
sky
run.
stretches forever
I
across
didn't look
the plains. My sneakers
When you
pounded the
spend
dirt
enough
shoulder
time behind the wheel,
My breath
the highway
coming
stops
stops
being a
gasps.
place you
I
travel
hit the
through
tree line and ducked
starts
between the
being a
trunks,
place you
pulling
live
out my
in.
phone again. That was the life I chose.
One bar,
My
thank
name's
God.
Logan. I dialed 911.
And this story
the
happened
dispatcher
on a
answered
bitter
on the
January
second ring.
night somewhere in the middle of
911, what's your
Kansas.
emergency? I'd left
My car
Kansas
broke
City
down,
just
I
after
panted.
sunset with a trailer
There's a
full
man.
of auto
He
parts
followed me.
bound
I
for
think he's
Denver.
still out there. Please send someone.
Dispatch wanted me
Stay
there
on the
by
line,
noon the
man.
next day. Can you
The
describe
forecast
your
called for
location?
snow out west,
Somewhere
but for
off
now,
Ridge
the
Road
night
near
was
the
clear.
turn for Maple Hollow. I
Cold
said,
enough that the air
stabbed at your lungs.
The
if you
dispatcher's
stepped
tone
outside.
stayed steady.
But the kind
We've
of
got
cold
units
that
on the
made the
way.
stars look like
Stay
diamonds.
hidden, stay quiet.
I hadn't seen another vehicle.
I crouched
for an hour.
behind a fallen log,
Out there, the
phone
plane
pressed to my
stretched so
ear,
far
trying
you
to
feel
listen
like
for
you're driving
movement.
across an
I
ocean
could hear
made of
twigs
grass.
snapping in the dark.
The
slow
only
and
light came
deliberate.
from my headlights.
10
and the faint
minutes
red glow
stretched
of
like
my
an hour.
dashboard. The
Then I
CD
saw
radio
flashing
had been
red and
silent
blue
most
through
of
the
the
trees.
night.
The
I
man's
kept it on
trunk
channel
lights flickered
19 out
once,
of
then
habit.
went dark.
But after
When the
midnight,
officers
truckers are
reached me,
usually
I could
either
barely
asleep or
speak.
too tired to talk.
One of them,
They Officer
Hale
Static shined a flashlight down the
hiss
road.
came through, followed by
My car
a faint
sat where
voice.
I'd left it.
Do you
Engine
see
still
me?
running.
I frowned.
Driver's door open.
Say again.
They
Breaker
found
19.
footprints. His mine.
Nothing
both
but
leading
static.
toward the woods. Probably some
His
kid with a
print stopped
handheld
halfway
messing
around.
around.
It
The
happens.
rest disappeared into
I
nothing.
turned the squelch down
They
and
never
kept
found
rolling.
him. The
For
road
a
went
week
on
I couldn't
forever.
sleep.
Black
Every
asphalt
sound outside
framed
my
by
window,
snow,
every
passing
passing
car
telephone
made my
poles
stomach
flicking
twist.
past like metronome
The police
ticks.
came back twice to
Still,
take
the
follow-up
voice stuck in my
statements.
head.
They
How
were
do you see
kind,
me?
but I could tell
I
they
didn't
didn't know why
expect
it
to
bothered
find
me,
him.
but it did. They said he was likely
About
a
20
drifter.
minutes later, a glimmer
Maybe
of light
someone
appeared
looking for
ahead on the
trouble who
shoulder.
got scared off when I ran.
As I got closer, I realized
But
it was
something
another
about it
truck.
stuck in my head.
An older Peterbilt,
The way he'd
maybe
said
late
I got a
70s,
shop
parked
nearby.
with its hazards
The way
weakly
he'd looked
flashing.
past me, not at me.
The lights flickered like
he
they
was
were scanning
dying.
for something else.
I slowed down.
My mom wanted me to
instinctively
stay
reaching
with her
the
for a
mic.
while.
Breaker
I
19,
did.
you all right
Her
up
house
there,
was
driver?
small, warm.
I called, filled with
No
the smell
answer.
of cinnamon candles
I tried
and safety.
again.
Still
But even
silence.
there, when you've been
I
in
couldn't
this line
shake
of
the
work as
feeling
long
that
as I
someone had
have,
seen me. You look out for your dark like I was meant to be in the middle of nowhere in that kind of cold. People try to act normal. I pulled onto the shoulder behind him and grabbed my flashlight. You're lucky, Sophia. The air hit me like a hammer the moment I stepped out. The Peterbilt looked rough. I heard that word a lot. Cracked mirrors, snow crusted on the steps. The sound of gravel. The driver's door was closed, but the engine was still running, burning holes in the low like it hadn't been tuned in years. A detective called me 2 weeks later. I climbed up the step and knocked on the door. Near an abandoned property off Ridge Road, but nothing else. No license plate, no trace. Sometimes the cab light was on, he said gently. The driver's seat was empty. It's not personal. A thermos sat in the cup holder with steam still rising from it. A month later, on the dash lay a worn leather wallet and an open logbook. I told myself it was time to stop living scared. Hello? It was late September when I first heard the light. The sleeper berth was empty. I was home alone. No sign of struggle. My roommate had gone to her boyfriend's place. Just the clock read 11:47. I froze, every muscle. I felt a chill crawl up my neck that had nothing to do with the wind. 3 times. Something about that still warm coffee hit me wrong. Just darkness and the faint glimmer of porch light catching on wet pavement. Maybe he'd stepped out to take a leak. Nothing. Maybe he'd gone for help. Maybe there were no buildings for miles. But when I opened the door the next morning, there were footprints, large, mud back down the step, leading from the driveway to my door and back again. The shadows looked deeper than they should have. They checked the area. For a moment I thought I saw movement. The prints had been washed out by rain before they could cast them. But then it was gone. Could be anyone, one of them said. I told myself it was just the beam catching on the snow. The shape of the boot tread. I climbed into my own truck by my car doors and sat there with the engine idling. After that, I stopped walking alone. My hands were trembling slightly as I picked up the mic. I carried pepper spray everywhere, I said. But more than anything, I started watching me out here near mile marker 212 on I-70 westbound. Years an abandoned rig engine running, no driver. And I still think about it every time I drive home after dark. They never found the man or the truck. Maybe he's out there somewhere, maybe not. I froze. Sometimes I catch my reflection in the rearview mirror and realize something changed in me that night. Only the hiss of static. I don't scare easy anymore, but I don't trust easy either. Threw the rig into gear and pulled back onto the highway inside. The one that road ahead was a long, dark ribbon cutting through white fields. You don't argue with it. I pushed the pedal harder than I should have, just wanting distance because I'm alive, because I ran. My pulse thudded in my ears. Every so often I'll drive past that same stretch of Ridge Road. Some sick prank. The grass is taller now. Another driver. The mailbox is rusted. Channel messing with my old cars. Maybe the guy from that truck had something newer. CB in the woods and thought it'd be funny. But when the wind picks up through those trees, it sounds like footsteps. I'd gone about 5 miles when I can still see those headlights in my mind. You shouldn't have stopped. The same voice whispered. I don't hate that memory softer this time. It reminds me that fear sometimes is just from inside the trying to save your life. Cut the crap. No matter how polite the danger looks, no matter how normal the moment feels, my palms were slick. Something deep inside you whispers, run. The road dipped slightly and my headlights caught a shape ahead. About being fearless. At first it looked like about respecting the fear that's trying to keep you alive. 2 legs, not 4. I hit the brakes. The tires screamed against the ice. Standing in the beam was a man. He was drenched from head to toe. It was nearly 2 a.m. when I left Rick's place. Clothes clinging out to his body, colder than I expected. His skin looked gray in the light. We'd spent the evening fixing the old fence behind his barn. Brown canvas with a torn fell into the couch for a late-night football game in that abandoned truck. My hand still smelled like cedar and engine oil. I slammed the horn, a reminder that I promised myself this would be an early night, and just stared at me. Broke that tilted slightly like he was trying to recognize me. Rick lived out past the county line. He raised his arm and my route home took me through a stretch of rural Kentucky road that cut through miles of farmland. I threw the truck into reverse, backed up until my trailer straightened, and shifted to drive and swerved around street lights for 10 miles at a time. My mirrors showed only empty highway. Sound was the hum of my old Ford's engine and the rhythmic slap of gravel against the undercarriage. By the time I hit the next rest stop, I remember thinking how peaceful it felt. I parked under the brightest light I could find, engine still running, me, the road, and a sky full of stars so clear you could almost reach out and grab them. My headlights was silent except for the low rumble of a mailbox leaning from a couple of other trucks. Half rusted that read, I wasn't alone here, thank God. 7 miles. Inside the rest area, the fluorescent lights buzzed. That was when I saw the lights. A woman behind the counter looked up from pulsing red dots ahead, rough like the hazard blinkers of a stranded car. You could say that, I said, grabbing distant, harmless. You seen any other trucks stop through lately? They painted the road in flashes of red and shadow. She frowned, thinking, breaking the stillness. There was one towed in last week after a wreck. At first, my brain ran on autopilot. Someone might be stuck. Maybe hit a deer. You stopped to help. That's what decent people do out here. So I slowed down. They say he lost control on the ice and window down halfway and leaned toward the glass. A silver sedan right near mile marker 212 buried in mud. The number hit me like curling from the hood. I didn't say anything. A woman stepped into my headlights, just paid for my coffee and stepped outside. She wore a heavy coat, hair tangled, face pale and desperate. Light but steady. My headlights cast long spears of white through the flakes. My husband climbed into the cab and sat there staring at the CB mic. I put the truck in park and I didn't want to touch it, but I had to know. You okay, ma'am? I turned the radio back on. She came closer. Static filled the cab, breath clouding in the constant. For a long time, nothing happened. Then he's still inside. Please, I can't move him.
My coffee spill across
made
the
me
floor.
hesitate.
Outside,
Not fear
through the
exactly,
blur of
more like
falling snow.
strain. I
Like
swore I saw someone
standing by the tail of my trailer.
I glanced
The
toward the
outline
ditch,
of a man,
but couldn't see anyone in the
hunched,
driver's seat.
head bowed,
Just an empty shape behind
I blinked
the
and
fogged
he was
windshield.
gone.
I left
That
the
was
rest
when I
area
heard it.
before dawn.
A crunch of gravel
The snow
behind
had
me.
stopped, leaving a
I
pale
looked into
mist
the
that
rearview
hugged the
mirror.
ground. A shape
I
was
drove
crouched
without
low
the
near my
radio on,
tailgate,
without
a man's
music,
face
without
half
anything
anything
but
but
the
the sound of the engine
eyes
and my
locked
own
on
breathing
mine.
through the reflection.
When I reached Denver, I dropped my
stomach
load,
load,
signed the papers,
The woman
and
saw
parked
me
the rig
look.
at the yard.
Her expression
I
changed
sat there
instantly.
for a long time
Panic
before
not
shutting
me,
off the
but
key.
for me. The
Don't get
silence was
out, she
deafening.
said sharply, her tone
That night
snapping
in my
like a
hotel
whip.
room, I couldn't sleep.
It wasn't a plea.
Every time I
It was
closed
a
my
warning.
eyes, I saw that man,
Every
dripping,
instinct
squinting
pointing at
eyes
me.
hollow. I
I
slammed the
kept
gear into
replaying
drive
it,
and
wondering
forth.
if I'd imagined it
My
all.
tires spun, throwing
Stress,
mud before
fatigue,
catching
the
isolation
isolation
of the road.
I
I
shot
shot
forward,
forward,
swerving
swerving
around
her as the man
That's what I
lunged
told
toward the
myself.
door handle. But a week later, his hand
I
smacked
stopped
the
at a
glass
diner
leaving
off
a print
I-70
and overheard two
The truck
drivers talking at
fishtailed
the
hard
counter.
before straightening
Crazy
out.
story, one
In
said.
my mirror,
They found
I
a
saw the
Peterbilt
woman
out near
sprint into the
212
dark
again.
field, her
Empty
voice
cab
cutting through the
engine
night,
running,
but I couldn't
Cops
make
say
out
the
the
driver's
words.
rig was stolen and
Then
found
they were
miles
gone.
away, doors open.
The ditch, the car,
no sign
the
of him.
blinking
I didn't
lights
say a
followed
word.
by distance.
I just paid my bill.
I didn't slow down
Walked
until I
out
hit the
and county
county
highway
highway
10 miles later.
Before I started the engine,
My
I
heart
looked at the
pounded so
passenger
hard I
seat.
could barely breathe. Lying there was an
I told
old wet
myself
leather
I'd go
wallet.
straight to the police
I
station
hadn't
in
noticed it
Lexington.
before. That I wouldn't
My hands
even go
started
home
to shake.
first. But when I
CB
pulled into the
crackled.
lot, hands
Do you see
trembling, the
me?
story sounded
That was the
insane
last
even in
time
my
I ever
head.
drove that stretch
Still,
of
I
highway.
reported it. Sometimes
They
the
took
road
notes,
isn't
promised
empty.
to check it
It
out.
remembers. I drove
Out there
home
in the
watching my
dark
mirror
where
silence
silence
stretches
way.
farther than the
That
horizon.
night I didn't sleep.
You learn the
Every
value
time
of
I
trusting
closed
your
my eyes,
instincts.
I saw that
when
woman's
something feels
face.
wrong, it usually
How quickly
is.
fear had
Curiosity
turned
may
into
be part
warning.
of human nature. But
The
the
next
next
morning,
morning,
my
my
phone
phone
rang
rang
at
at
8:17.
8:17. In life, as on the highway,
It was Deputy
not
Collins
every
from
call
the
for help
sheriff's
comes from
office.
the living, and not
Mr.
every
Mason,
silence means you're
we
alone.
went out
there first thing. You weren't imagining things. My heart thudded. What did you find? He sighed. Tire tracks, footprints, broken taillight. Couple of spots in
It's
the field
funny how
where
you
you
can
can
live
live somewhere
forensics
for
dig
years
up.
and still
Looks
not
like
really see
graves,
it until
shallow
you're
ones,
alone at night.
graves.
I'd been
The word
working
hit
at like a
Ruby's
hammer
diner
since I was
Any
19.
sign of the car?
Just a small
None.
place off
No
Highway
debris,
14.
no plates, nothing.
Famous for our
But the
pancakes
soil's
and
fresh.
bottomless coffee. You did good calling it
I was
in.
27 now, still there.
I spent the rest of
Still
that
working
day
the
trying
late
to
shift
shake it
that
off,
ran
but it
until
clung
2 in
to
the
me.
morning.
Every errand
Most
felt
nights,
hollow.
the world outside felt
At the
like an
grocery
old
store, the
photograph.
hum of the freezer
Quiet
aisle made me
washed
flat
out.
and slightly crooked
At the
around
gas
the edges.
station, the sight of a silver
My
sedan
walk home
made
usually
my
took
stomach
about 30
twist.
minutes if I
That
stayed on the
evening,
main
Rick
road.
stopped by after hearing
But that
about it
route
from his
past
brother,
the empty lumber
who
yard
worked in
and the
dispatch.
stretch of half-lit houses that
Hell,
always
Dan,
made
you
me
could have
feel
been
another
watched.
name on the news, he said.
The shortcut,
setting a
a
six-pack
narrow
on my
alley
counter.
between two abandoned
They're
brick
saying it's
warehouses.
the same stretch where
Shaved
folks have
a
gone
minutes
missing
off.
before.
It
wasn't exactly safe looking.
He nodded grimly.
But I'd walked it
3
so
last
many
year.
times I could picture
Travelers
every crack
mostly.
in the pavement.
Cops figured
the air
accidents
always
are people
smelled
just
faintly of
taking
wet
off.
cement and
Guess
old
not.
rain. That night
We
I
sat
clocked
inside
out
at
at
2:12
2:12
a.m.
a.m. The beer tasted
diner's
like
neon
metal.
sign flickered
I
as I
keep
stepped
thinking
outside.
about her, I said finally.
It was drizzling.
The woman. Just enough to paint
told
the
me not to get
asphalt
out.
in streaks of
She
orange
saved
from
me.
the streetlights. Rick leaned back,
I
eyes
tugged my
narrowed.
jacket tighter and
You sure
started
she wasn't
walking.
part of it? My sneakers
I wanted to
squeaking in
say
the
yes.
puddles. But the truth
thought
was
about
I
how
didn't
I'd know.
spend my day off tomorrow.
That night, sleep came in
Maybe
fits.
sleep in, maybe
Every
finally
creak of
fix
the
the
house
leaky
sounded
faucet
like
in the
footsteps.
kitchen. Around 3
The town was
a.m.
quiet,
I woke to a
except
car
for the
slumming
hum
of
of
a
a
passing truck somewhere
Headlights
far
crawled
off.
across my wall and stopped.
I turned onto Cherry
I held
Avenue
my
where
breath.
the alley began.
After a long
The
moment,
rain made the
engine
world
revved
feel
and faded
smaller.
into the distance.
The sound of it bouncing
When
off the
morning
brick
came,
walls
I found
like
fresh
whispers.
tire marks
I
at the edge
remember
of my
glancing
driveway.
up. The
2
clouds
days later,
hung
I
low,
drove back to
heavy,
Barton Hollow.
like they wanted to
Maybe
crush
it was
the rooftop.
curiosity, maybe guilt.
Halfway through, I
needed
heard
to see the
footsteps,
place
light
in
but
daylight.
steady. I stopped.
The police tape fluttered
The sound
weakly on the
stopped, too.
wind.
I turned
marking
around
a patch of
nobody.
churned dirt
Just
near
a
the
slick
field.
stretch of wet pavement
I
and
stood
the
there
faint
for a
orange
while,
glow
the silence
reflecting
thick.
off the puddles.
Birds had
I let
returned
out
to
a
the fence
shaky
posts,
breath,
oblivious to
told
what the
myself
ground
it was
hid
just my
beneath them.
echo or maybe the drip
That's
of
when I
water
noticed
from a
the
drain
woman.
pipe. She was standing
been
by
up
the
for
tree
12
line
hours
about
straight.
50 yards away,
My mind
wearing
playing
the
tricks
same heavy
sometimes.
coat.
I started walking again, faster this time.
I called, stepping
But
toward
the sound
her.
returned, a
She
closer,
didn't
quicker,
move.
matching me.
The wind stirred
I
her
could
hair
hear
across her
breathing now,
face.
low and uneven,
Are you okay?
like someone trying not to
Are
be
you
hurt.
hurt?
Still
My stomach
nothing.
tightened.
Then
The
she
air
turned
seemed thicker.
Not fast,
I
not
spun
slow, just
around again,
deliberate, and that's when I
and
saw
she
it.
smiled.
A silhouette
It wasn't
crouched
against
against the
the
wall
wall
near a
relieved
leaf
to
to
be
be found. Wide eyes,
It was
catching the
knowing.
streetlight. I
I
blinked
froze.
and she was gone.
Then instinct took
I
over.
ran to where
I
she'd
ran.
been standing.
My shoes
Only
splashed through
footprints
puddles
faint
as I
leading
tore
into
down
the
the
trees,
last
then
stretch of the
gone.
alley.
Driving home,
My heart
my mind
pounding so
spiraled
loud
between
it drowned
logic and
everything
dread.
else out.
Maybe
I
trauma
burst
had
onto
my
Maple Street
imagination running
gasping,
wild.
clutching my bag to
Maybe
my
she'd been
chest.
real. When I finally
Maybe
turned
she
back,
wanted
the
to warn
figure
me
hadn't
again.
moved. That
It
night,
stood
someone
perfectly
knocked on my
still.
door.
No, not stood. It was dead.
It was
posed.
posed. Evening, Mr.
And as the
Mason,
light
mind if I
shifted, I
come
saw
in?
the shine of
He
molded
held a manila
plastic.
folder.
A
Inside
mannequin.
were photos,
But
crime
not
scene
just any
shots,
evidence
mannequin.
bags. It was wearing a
We dug
Ruby's
up
diner
3
uniform.
sites. Two
White
sets of
shirt,
remains
red
so
apron,
far.
name tag.
One's recent,
My
female
name
name
tag.
tags.
By the time I got home, I was shaking so hard I could barely get my keys into the door.
I saw. He nodded.
I told myself it was a prank.
We think she might have been
Some
one of
kids,
them.
maybe someone from the diner messing around.
Weeks passed, but I
Deep
couldn't
down,
shake
it
the
didn't
feeling
feel
like
like
something
that.
from that
The
road had
mannequins
followed me
face,
home.
blank, painted,
My
frozen
dreams
in
were
a
filled
faded
with
headlights,
headlights,
flashing red
was
lights,
burned
the
into
crunch
my
of
mind.
gravel. I stopped driving at
The
night
next morning, I
altogether.
barely slept.
One afternoon,
When
the
the
sun
sun
came
came
from
up,
work and found
everything
my front
looked
door
harmless
ajar.
again, like the night
My
had
first
just
thought
been
was
a bad
burglary,
dream.
but nothing was taken. Still, when I walked
Instead,
into work,
there was
I
a
found
folded
myself
note on the
scanning the
kitchen
parking
counter.
lot.
It
Half
read,
expecting to see
"Thank you
that
for
same
not
plastic
stopping."
figure
No
leaning
signature.
against the wall.
No explanation.
Ruby noticed
I
right
called
away that
Collins
something was
immediately.
off.
He
You
brought a
look
team
like
to
hell,
dust
Ellie,
for prints,
she
none
said,
found.
sliding me a coffee.
You sure you locked
Rough
up? He
night.
asked.
Didn't
I
sleep
always
much,
lock
I
up.
said, trying to sound
Then
casual.
whoever left this
She
knew
gave
how to
me a
get
look
in
but
without
didn't
breaking
press.
in.
Around
Maybe
noon
someone
during
you
the
know.
lunch rush, I
The
thought
thought made
maybe
me
something
sick.
that made my
For
stomach
days,
drop.
I carried the
Through
note
the
in my
front
wallet.
window across the street
Like
near the
proof
old
that the
pharmacy,
nightmare
there
was
was
still
shape.
real.
Tall,
Rick told me
pale,
to get
standing
cameras
in the shade.
installed, but even that didn't
A
help.
mannequin.
The
Same
cameras
uniform,
caught
same
nothing.
red apron. Just the
I
wind,
blinked hard.
stray dogs, and my
When
own
I looked
reflection
again, it was
coming home
gone.
late. By the end of my
Then
shift,
one night
I
I saw her
convinced
again.
myself I was just
This
exhausted.
time in
my backyard by
Seeing
the edge of the
things.
woods, maybe
Same
even
coat,
dreaming
same
with my
pale
face
face.
open.
She
But
didn't
as I
move.
clocked out that night,
Didn't
I noticed
speak.
something strange.
Just raised a hand slowly,
My
as
name
if
tag,
pointing
the one I
behind me.
wore every shift, was
I
missing
spun
from my
around.
apron. Nothing
I
there.
checked my locker, my
When I
bag,
turned
even
back,
the
she was
counter,
gone
nothing.
again.
Lose
I
something.
started sleeping with the
I
lights
turned.
on.
It was Jake, the line
A month
cook.
later, the sheriff's
His
office
voice always
called.
had this teasing edge.
They'd identified the
My name
bodies.
tag, I said.
One was a woman
You
named
haven't
Ellen
seen it,
Price,
have you?
missing 3 months.
He shook his head.
Married to a man named
Probably
George
fell off
Price.
somewhere.
Don't sweat it.
He was a suspect
but I did
in her
sweat it.
disappearance,
all
but
the
he
way
vanished
home.
too.
This
The
time
name
I
hit me
avoided
like
the
a
alley
bullet.
and took the long route.
I'd seen that name before.
The streets were nearly
on
empty.
an old mailbox.
The rain
along
gone,
Route
but the
14
air
and a
still
half
damp.
mile from where the wreck
Every
had been
passing
staged.
shadow made me flinch. That night I couldn't
When I
stay
reached
in
my
the house.
apartment, I locked
I
the
got in
door,
my truck and
drew
drove.
the curtains,
The
and
road
checked them
stretched
twice.
ahead, empty as ever.
I kept telling
the same
myself it
darkness
couldn't follow
pressing
me.
in.
When I
That it
reached the
wasn't
turn
even
off to
real.
Barton Hollow,
But
I
at
slowed.
3:17 a.m.
The ditch was
when I got up to
overgrown
get
now.
water,
No tape,
I
no
saw
signs.
something through the
Just
gap in my
quiet.
curtains. A figure
For a
standing
moment,
under
I
the
thought I saw
streetlight.
movement,
a flicker of red in the
mannequin.
distance. And this
But
one
it
was
was just
wearing
my
my
own
missing
brake
lights
name tag.
reflecting off a road sign.
I called the police
I
the
sat
next
there
morning.
with the engine idling.
They sent an
gripping the
officer,
wheel.
a young guy named
Thank you.
Henson.
I
who
whispered,
looked too tired to
though
care.
I wasn't sure to whom.
I explained
The
everything,
woman,
the
the
alley,
ghost,
the
or my own
mannequin,
better
the name
judgment.
tag.
Then
He
I
wrote
turned
it
the
all
truck
down,
around and drove
nodded
home.
occasionally, but I
I
could
haven't
tell he
taken
didn't
that road
riot.
since.
So
Sometimes
someone's putting
when the night
mannequins
gets too
around
quiet,
town?
I still hear her voice in my head,
finally.
sharp and urgent.
Weird, yeah, but
Don't
not
get
exactly
out.
a crime.
Evil doesn't always
It's
look
wearing
like
my
danger.
uniform, I said,
It often
my
wears
voice
the
shaking.
mask of desperation.
It was waiting for me.
Trust your
He
instincts,
sighed.
even when kindness
Could be a
feels like
prank.
obligation.
You'd be
In
surprised
a world
what
where
poor
good
people
intentions
do.
can be
Just
used
stay
as
alert,
traps.
okay?
He
Survival
left after
sometimes
10
depends
minutes.
on knowing
I
when
felt
not to
worse than
stop.
before he came. When I got to work that afternoon, the place was unusually quiet. Jake was chopping onions in the kitchen. Ruby was counting tips in the office. People always think
The diner
long-haul
felt
trucking is
off.
about freedom. I went to hang up my
Open
coat and
skies,
saw
good
something
music,
taped
and the
to
hum
my
of the
locker
engine
door
underneath your boots.
A photo. It
Maybe
showed the
it is
back
for
alley
some
behind
folks.
Ruby's. For me, it's
The
more
same
like
one I've
living
walked through
between
that
radio
night.
stations. In the corner of the
Always
photo,
halfway
half
hidden
somewhere
by
by
shadow,
stood the
always
mannequin.
missing something you can't
Someone had
name.
written under it in red marker.
I've been hauling freight
See
for
you
20
after
years.
work.
Electronics
My knees almost
mostly.
gave out. TVs,
I ripped the
monitors,
photo down
gaming
and
stuffed it
systems.
into my pocket. The kind of
I
stuff
didn't
that
tell
costs a
Ruby
fortune
what would I
but
even
doesn't
say.
weigh much. That a mannequin was
It was
stalking
early
me.
January,
That
right
night
after
I
a
didn't take any
snowstorm
route home
swept
across the
I
Dakotas.
called Jake instead.
The kind of
Hey, you
night where
driving
the air
tonight?
feels sharp enough
Yeah,
to
he
slice
said,
through
why?
denim.
Can you give me a ride?
Dispatch gave me a route from
Don't ask
Minneapolis
why.
down to Denver.
He showed up
about
after
1,100
closing.
miles.
I felt
and told me
stupid
to
sitting
take
in
my
his car,
time. Clutching my
The
bag
load
like it was a
insured,
life raft, but not urgent.
You sure you're okay?
I left
asked.
before sundown.
I will be, I
rolling
said.
through empty
Once I'm
fields
home.
buried in snow. He drove in silence.
The sky
radio
turned
playing
black
soft
quick,
country music,
swallowing everything
The rain
except
started
the thin
again.
ribbon of highway
Thin
in front of
streaks
me.
across the windshield.
The CB
When we
crackled
pulled
with
up
a
to
few
my
voices.
building, I reached for the
Truckers
handle.
swapping jokes,
Then
talking
froze.
weather, complaining about
Across
DOT
the street, under the
checkpoints. light stood the mannequin.
But by midnight,
Jake
it was
followed
just
my
static.
gaze. What the hell?
Most folks pull over
Before
by
I could
then.
finish, the figure toppled
I
forward,
don't.
face first onto the pavement,
I
arms
liked the
bent
night.
awkwardly.
Fewer
It didn't
cars,
move again.
fewer
We
distractions.
sat there silent, listening
just
to
me
the
and
rain.
the hum of diesel.
The next day, I couldn't face
Still,
going to work.
there's a loneliness
I
that
called in
creeps in
sick,
after
though Ruby
midnight.
didn't sound convinced.
The road starts
Jake
to feel
texted me
endless.
later saying the police
Like
had
you're
come by
driving
the
through
diner
space.
asking questions
I turned
about
up the heater
vandalism.
and the radio.
Someone had
But it
broken
didn't
into
help.
the supply shed
My
behind the
coffee had
building.
gone cold.
Left mannequin
My
limbs
eyelids
scattered
were heavy.
everywhere. I wanted to forget
When I
it
saw
all,
the
but I
blue
couldn't.
rest area sign,
Every time I closed my eyes, I
next
saw
right
that
1
blank
mile.
plastic smile. It
I
felt like
needed
an
answers.
invitation. So that night,
The
I
place
went
was
back to
dead
where
quiet.
it started, the alley.
A single pickup
It
sat
was just
far
past
off by the
midnight.
trees.
The rain
Headlights
had
dim,
stopped, but the
still
ground was
burning.
slick.
I carried a
parked my
flashlight
rig
under
in
the
kitchen
yellow
knife
glow
I
of the
probably
lamppost.
wouldn't know how to
Climbed
use.
down and
The
stretched.
alley was silent except
The
for the
cold
hum
bit
of
through
the
my
distant
gloves
generator.
instantly.
I swept the light over my boots on the pavement, trash bags, grabbed $1 from my pocket until I reached the dumpster vending machine. There, propped against the coffee, tasted like rust and burnt sugar. Its limbs had been reattached. It was hot. Its head tilted slightly like it was curious, listening to the wind. My name tag still hung crookedly on its chest. No sound of cars, and no engines written on the wall. Just that eerie stillness you get in the middle of nowhere. When I came back out, someone was standing behind my trailer. Who's doing this? I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. Figured he was another driver checking his tires. For a moment, nothing, but he didn't move. Then my footsteps just stood there, half in the shadows. Coat collar turned up, stepped out from behind the dumpster, tall, wearing a hooded raincoat. I called out. He looked older, gaunt. No answer. I recognized something inside me. He'd been a customer at the diner weeks ago. Told me to get back in the cab. Always came in near closing. I always sat alone. Locked both doors. I just wanted to see you, he said, voice soft. Sat there watching through the mirror. You always smiled at me. He stayed still for a minute, then started walking, went slowly toward the passenger side. He nodded, eyes flicking to the mannequin. My pulse spiked. Made her for you. I laid on the horn, so you'd never long and loud. I backed up. The guy froze, then sprinted off into the trees. Then he stepped closer and I ran. I dropped the flashlight, heart pounding down the alley, his heart hammering in my ears. After a minute, I didn't stop until I was pounding on a police station door 10 blocks away. Anybody got ears near I-29 southbound? His name was Daniel. Got a suspicious guy at the Mile 84 rest stop years ago before getting fired. A few truckers answered. Nobody nearby. The mannequins were leftover stock. I waited a while, engine idling, dressed, then decided to roll out. The police found dozens in a storage unit. He rented near the train yard. Maybe just lost. He told them I was special, but my gut said otherwise. It's been 3 months now. My gut said Ruby's diner is back to normal. Jake still jokes about Ellie and the highway looked the same as before. I just smile. Empty and endless. The alley. I don't even work the late shift behind my trailer like smoke. But sometimes walking home, the clock on the dash said 2:17 a.m. I tell myself tried to focus on the echo, but my eyes kept drifting to the mirrors. I hope it is. Never ignore every time the wind caught a reflection, I thought I saw movement. We grow up learning to be polite, to second-guess fear, to rationalize danger as coincidence. Still, I couldn't shake it. Instincts exist. My headlights carved 2 narrow tunnels into the dark. Something feels wrong, that usually is nothing. Every shadow looked like a man standing on the shoulder. Every flicker looked like a signal. After about an hour, I decided to pull into the next rest area. I figured I'd grab another coffee, check the load, maybe catch some air. The place was brighter than the last one. Newer building, more lights, but just as empty. I climbed down and walked around the trailer. My breath hung in the air, thick and white. That's when I saw it. Muddy handprints, smeared across the back doors. High up, too high for someone standing on the ground. I froze. My flashlight beam trembled as I moved it closer. If you've ever lived in the old part of a big city, long, streaked you know downward, that quiet doesn't really exist. Someone had been hanging on and lost their constant hum. The mud was fresh, scooters, still wet despite the cold. Shouting, dogs barking. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. Delhi's old city had that kind of noise alive even after midnight. I'd lived there most of my life. No sounds except the two-bedroom flat above a grocery shop. My mind started spinning, with a balcony that looked out over tangled power lines. The last stop been on my trailer the whole time. My mother and I riding along after my freezing dark. I didn't even want to think about it. She refused to leave, saying the noise made her feel less alone. Hit the road faster than before. We had learned to live with the small inconveniences. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped my tap water. The power radio that came without warning. I caught some chatter about a state trooper who found a body near an old rest stop 2 days earlier. The air turning heavy and still. They didn't have details. You'd sweat, turn the volume down an old newspaper and wait. The road stretched ahead, black and endless. That night felt no different. Every time my trailer rattled, I imagined something banging from inside. The city had been teasing us with rain for days, but none came. By sunrise, I was somewhere in Nebraska. Her body worn down. I hadn't stopped once. I stayed up late working on my laptop, and the heater was barely keeping up with the cold. Around 11:40, the truck stopped for fuel twice, parked by the pump, then died, and just sat there staring at the steering wheel. I sighed, saved what I could, and closed the laptop. Wrapped in a hoodie. I'd been through this enough times to know what came next. He said, stamping his feet. A long wait. Rough night. Mosquitoes. And the strange, hollow quiet that fills a home. He started filling the tank. Stopped, glancing at the back of the trailer. I lit a candle and sat by the window. What's all that mud from? Outside, most of the buildings were dark. I said, their outlines faint under the moonlight. He didn't push it. Just nodded slowly like he'd heard Stranger Things. Dog whining. I grabbed breakfast inside below a gate, pancakes, watery coffee, metal against metal, and tried to convince myself it was over. Listening, probably just some vagrant who climbed up looking for a ride. Ones too steady to belong to someone just passing through. That's what I told myself. The corridor outside our flat wasn't long, but the image of those handprints wouldn't leave me. I told myself it was later that afternoon. A state patrol cruiser pulled into the box. The trooper came inside, right outside our door. Sunglasses. Then came a faint rustling. As if someone brushed against the wall. I held my breath. You the driver of that white Kenworth outside? I waited a full minute before whispering to myself. Something wrong? Probably he held up his badge. That's when I saw the I-29 rest area around 2 this morning.
Steady sway from the balcony.
I nodded. The kind that happens when someone's standing just behind it.
We had a call about a suspicious person out there.
My first thought was that the wind had picked up.
Fits the description of a man we've been looking for.
I could see the flame of the candle from Sioux Falls, standing perfectly still. May have tried to hitch a ride. A man's stomach dropped, tall.
You saying he could have been on my
against
truck?
the dim light coming from the street
Hard to
below.
say.
The officer
Mom,
replied.
I whispered.
But if you see or hear anything unusual, call it in.
Annika, what is it?
He left on the balcony, but his words,
By the time she reached the doorway, her eyes wide,
mental
the man
patient.
moved.
A half step forward, out of the shadow. The idea that he might have been inches from me for miles made my skin crawl. His shirt clung to him with sweat, and his bare feet were covered in dust. The handprints had frozen solid now, the door frame, crusted in gray ice.
Who's that?
He stared at them a long time before climbing back into the cab. His voice was soft, exhausted.
Then I locked the doors.
I just need water.
Again,
I grabbed my phone out of instinct. No signal. Night fell early that day. The blackout must have taken the cell tower down too.
Stay there.
The snow had stopped, but the world looked washed out.
Don't move.
Just gray sky and darker ground.
I'm not here to hurt anyone.
My headlights barely cut through. His tone wasn't threatening. The road curved endlessly. A
black ribbon
nearest
leading
thing I
nowhere.
could find. I
An
kept
old
the CB
umbrella.
off. Didn't want to hear anyone like a weapon. Talk. Just wanted the miles
How did you
behind
get
me.
in here?
But sometime after 9,
simply.
I started feeling that same pressure in my chest. I'd locked it before bed. I knew I mirrors showed nothing. My mother whispered I couldn't give him water and let him go. At a way station outside North Platte, I pulled over to check again. My hands were shaking. I opened the back doors this time. I picked up a plastic bottle from the counter, or someone twisted the cap off and slid it toward him across the floor. He took it, keeping his distance, and drank it everything in trembling gulps. Still, when he finished, he wiped his mouth and whispered, "You're not back there, are you?" I tried to keep my voice steady. When I shut the doors, I noticed new marks in the grime. He hesitated. Faint streaks, like fingerprints along the latch. I won't come back. I didn't even check the balcony door. I just got back in the truck and kept driving. You shouldn't leave your door unlocked. By midnight, exhaustion hit hard. Then he was gone. Swallowed. I started seeing things in the snow. The power came back around 4:30 a.m. Faces humming through the ceiling fan. I slapped myself to stay awake. I didn't sleep a minute. The road felt alive. When the first pale light of dawn crept through the window, I finally pulled into a small diner off Highway 83. My mother followed close behind, still shaken. The waitress looked half asleep. The latch was broken. Coffee? Not forced from the outside, but bent from within as if someone had wedged it open quietly. She poured me using something thin toward the window. That your rig out there? He didn't lie. Yeah, I whispered. My mother sat down at the table when you pulled her palms together. She said casually, "Whoever he was, thought it was you." Worse. I felt every hair on my neck the rest of the day. I called the landlord first. Pretty sure, half asleep and irritated. Didn't look like a trucker though. Latches broke. I ran outside and scanning the lot. A few days. Just wine swirling snow across the pavement. He sighed. I circled the trailer. Nothing's been stolen, right? Nothing. It's probably one of those drifters from the railway colony. Like the snow had swallowed them. Keep the balcony locked. I didn't sleep that night. That was the kind of answer you got. I just drove. Calm dismissal. The road and I were one long stretch of fear. I couldn't shake Denver just after dawn. Dropped the trailer at the yard, signed the papers, and tried not to think about anything. The dispatcher handed me a new manifest, but I told him I needed rest. But deep down, something didn't sit right. I looked like hell. Why not any other door in the building? That evening, I checked every lock twice. Off I-70. My mother said prayers peeling wallpaper, humming radiator, smells like cigarettes. Every sound, the groan of the longest shadow of my life below had made me crawled into bed and told myself when I finally drifted off, I dreamt of the man around 3 a.m. Only this time he wasn't asking for water. A faint. He was standing by the bed, whispering something I couldn't hear. Then another. 2 nights later, it happened. I went to the window and pulled the curtain. The power cut out just after midnight. My truck sat under the street light. I'd been sitting by the window reading on my phone. But the back door, and when the trailer I dropped my stomach dropped, was slightly open. Not again, I muttered, lighting a candle. I threw on my boots. My mother was already asleep. Grabbed the tire iron from under the seat and stepped into the cold, pressing on the new latch. My breath fogged the air. It held firm. The lot was empty except for my rig and 2 other semis. Jumpy over shadows. The door creaked as I pulled from the balcony came a faint tap. Then I saw them. I froze. Hello? Fresh this time in the dust along the handle. I turned slowly. Same shape, same size. The curtain moved. I reported it to the yard the next morning. This time I grabbed the rolling camera from the counter and stepped forward. Nothing. No sign of anyone. No footprints in the snow. The voice said. The cop said maybe kids messing around. The man stepped into view again. But I knew better. Same clothes, same hollow face. I knew someone had been there. But now he looked following, waiting. Pale, sweat slick, shaking. I quit long-haul trucking a few months later. Distance. Took local. You said you wouldn't come back. I tell myself it's for family. He swallowed for health, for shorter hours. But I had nowhere else to go. But the truth is, I still see those handprints in my dreams. I hesitated. Every time I throw him out or call for help, I look twice. But I saw his bare feet again, cracked behind me. My heart races. The human part of me overruled the road. Still calls to me sometimes, but I've learned something out there in the cold. Keeping my eyes on the highway's not empty. He ate quickly, almost shamefully. No matter how experienced or prepared you think you are, you're kind. Always trust your instincts. Kind doesn't mean sometimes the danger isn't the road, the weather, or the load you carry. He lowered his head. It's the silence, I didn't mean to scare you. The sense that something just isn't right. Before they tore down the old block, exist to protect you. In life, as on the highway, my family might cost you more than a night's sleep. Then we lost everything. It might cost you everything. I came back because I didn't know where else to go. The blackout hummed around us. I've never liked long country drives at night, but sometimes you don't have a choice. For a moment I saw not a stranger. That Friday, my coworker Ben had invited a few of us to his cabin to celebrate finishing a big project. Please go, I said quietly. His place sat miles off the main road. No cell service, no neighbors, just when the lights flicked back on, the balcony was empty. We grilled, drank a few beers, and told old work stories around the fire. That a stranger with sad eyes and dirty feet had slipped through our broken lock to ask for water and bread. They'd laugh or worse, not believe me at all. I told myself I'd tell the landlord again. The air was cool, a new sky clear, and I wanted my own bed. Bars for the balcony. Ben warned me. He promised to fix it by the weekend. They love jumping out of nowhere. The next morning, I found something on the doorstep. I'd drive slow. A small brass key. The first few miles were peaceful, tied with a scrap of red tires and the rhythmic flash of white road lines. I don't know why, but I knew it was from him. My gas gauge hovered near empty. I finally slept, but I figured I could make it to the next town because I'd made peace with something. Then the road narrowed. The trees the world outside our door isn't divided neatly into good and bad, safe and dangerous. Just black forest swallowing both sides of the car. Desperate, broken, trying to survive the only way they know how. At first she was just a blur caught in my headlights. I lock the door every night, flailing, coat-soaked, hair plastered to her face. When the lights flickered and the hum rolled my window down into silence, I think about the man in the blackout. She stumbled toward me, fear and compassion can look in the dark, voice trembling. My car broke down. I've been walking for hours. I just need to get to town. Something about her eyes unsettled me. They kept darting over my shoulder. That October storm, toward the dark woods behind I used to think silence was Where's peace. Your car? I asked. Living out here in the countryside had that old postcard charm. A few miles back, rolling fields, quiet lanes, and neighbors so far apart you could go weeks without seeing just another to the gas station. I hesitated. When my husband Ryan started traveling terrified, but not the kind of scared that comes from being stranded. I had the kids, the house, my small photography channel online. I could handle the quiet. I can call for help when I get quiet has a sound of its own. Her face changed instantly. One you only hear when there's nothing else around. Don't call anyone. That night just began like any other. That's when I saw the finally asleep upstairs. Two sets of them, muddy and fresh, one leading from the woods to where she stood. I brewed coffee, heading back, my phone on the counter, my stomach and hit record for a short video. Before I could react, she screamed, "He's still here!" In the country, and ran into the open field beside the road. The thunder grumbled right on trees. A tall shadow, fast and deliberate, stepping into the edge of my headlights. By 9, the rain turned heavy. Took over. Sharp streaks against the kitchen glass and tore down the road. My heart hammering so hard I could barely the house, locking the doors, checking the windows until I reached the main highway. Control. I barely slept. When I came back to the kitchen, something didn't look right. The woman's face, her voice, the shadow slightly open. By just a crack, convinced myself it must have been something inexplainable. I always she was running from someone. Maybe I'd overreacted. Still, I couldn't shake the trees outside. So around 10 I told myself it was the county sheriff. Maybe the latch hadn't caught. The dispatcher sounded skeptical, but said otherwise. Patrol to check. I stepped closer. 2 hours later, an officer called air from outside brushed my skin. Sir, we found a car matching what you described. For the handle, and then silver sedan nose down in a ditch off Route 12. The world tilted. Was she there? I remember the mug slipping from my hand. The sound of ceramic shattering. Doors unlocked, keys still inside. Everything went black. We'll keep looking. When I woke, I wasn't on the floor. You did the right thing. My head felt stuffed with static. My vision swimming in and out of focus. Something about his tone said he didn't buy my story sitting upright. In the kitchen chair, that night I sat on my porch staring into the dark fields. When I tried to move, something tugged at my skin. At one point I thought I heard crying somewhere far off, but bound my wrists. When I stepped into the yard, it was silent against the chair's backrest. 2 days later, I stopped at a diner near the highway for breakfast. A sticky pull of tape covered it, sealing my voice. An older woman with silver hair. Panic came in waves. Noticed me staring at the TV above the counter. Tried to scream, but all that came out were muffled sobs. Authorities continued searching for a missing woman whose car was found abandoned on Route 12. The small lamp over the kitchen table flickered on, cutting through the darkness. The reporter said her name was Rachel Cooper. A man stood in the doorway, 32, his face was shadowed beneath the hood, the scarf covering the lower half. You know his voice when he spoke was low, steady. I saw her that I'm not here to hurt you, he said. Just tell me where the cash is. My mind spun. That afternoon, I met with the sheriff and shaking my head. He took my statement again, slower this time.
He didn't yell.
So she told you not to call for help? He just moved around the kitchen. Yeah, she seemed scared, like she was hiding from someone. Drawers, sliding jewelry into a small canvas bag. We found more footprints near the car. The whole thing felt impossible. 2 sets, like you said, watching a nightmare. But the second pair, Smaller, barefoot.
When he turned toward the stairs, something
in that
inside
freezing
me broke.
rain.
I screamed behind the tape, desperate and raw. I left his office,
looked
shaken,
back at me for a long
wondering
moment
if I'd
and said
escaped
quietly,
something worse than I realized.
"Don't worry. Your kids are still asleep."
I tried
He left
living
after
on, but
that.
every night the
Just
same
the sound of
dream
rain
returned.
swallowing him as a
He
woman
disappeared
screamed
into the
storm,
shadows, stepping for a long time I couldn't move.
I
Then
just
one
sat
evening
there,
Ben
the clock
called.
ticking too loud.
"You're
the
not
tape
going to
sticking
believe
to my
this," he
skin.
said. Finally, I
Cops
fought
were by
back,
my place
pulling,
this morning,
twisting, tearing
They
until
found
I
something
freed my
near the
mouth,
creek.
my wrists.
What was it?
The first thing
Just
I
an
did
old
was run
campsite.
upstairs. But get this,
The
there was
kids
a
were
phone
safe.
charger and a woman's
Both
shoe.
sleeping.
I felt
I
the
dropped
room
to my
tilt.
knees beside their
Rachel?
beds and cried harder
Maybe.
than I
They
ever
didn't
had in my
say.
life. That
The
night I
police
drove back
arrived
toward
within
the
the
area.
hour.
I
Blue
don't know
lights
why,
flashed
maybe
against the
guilt,
wet
maybe
windows in the
curiosity.
house. My safe,
The
perfect
forest
little
road
home
was muddy.
became a
The
crime
same
scene.
one
I'd
I'd
flown down that night. I sat wrapped in
When
a
I reached
blanket,
the spot
telling
where
them
I'd
what
seen
I
her,
heard.
I pulled over.
A man, average
The
height,
rain
hoodie
hoodie started
started
again,
voice,
soft and
no
cold.
accent I could place. I stepped out with a
One of the
flashlight.
officers said, "You're lucky."
The field was quiet,
People who
except for
break
the
in
hiss
at
of
night
drizzle
don't
usually
grass.
leave quietly. I almost convinced
That
myself
word,
it was over.
lucky,
Until I saw
echoed
fresh for days
footprints again.
afterward. They took
Bare
fingerprints,
ones.
photos,
They
statements.
led from the ditch
The
straight
house
to
looked
where I
smaller
stood,
now,
then vanished.
stripped of its
A whisper
warmth.
drifted through the
Every
trees,
creak
faint
made me
but
jump.
unmistakable.
Every shadow
Don't call
felt
for
like a
help.
shape waiting to
The
move.
investigation fizzled
Ryan
after
flew
2
home
weeks.
the next morning, guilt
Guilt
carved
carved
into
no
his face.
No answers.
The
tried
sheriff
to stay
figured
strong
Rachel
for
ran
me
off
off
or
or
met
met
but I
someone
saw
out
how
there.
shaken he was. But I couldn't let it go.
We installed new locks,
One night I got
cameras,
an envelope
alarms,
in my
everything.
mailbox, no return
But no
address.
gadget could fix the way
Inside
my body
was a
still
photo
flinched
taken
at the
from
sound of
behind me,
thunder.
showing
2
my
weeks
truck
later, the
parked
police
on Route
called.
12.
They'd
Scrawled
arrested
on the
the
back.
suspect.
You should
He
have
was
listened.
local.
Early 30s.
I moved to the city soon
no prior
after.
record. Traded country
followed
roads
my
for
channels
noise
online.
on streetlights. Piecing
Still,
together where
sometimes
we
when I'm
lived
driving
through
through the
the
little
little gas
glimpses I
gauge dips
posted,
low.
I'd
Drive
catch
myself
myself
glancing at the
background
shoulder
views,
half
even
expecting
the
to
brand
see
of
her
coffee
standing
mug I
there
used.
again. Arms He
waving,
confessed everything.
eyes
Said he
wide
never
with
meant to
fear.
harm anyone.
And
Just
every time I
desperate,
do, I
broke,
keep
angry
driving.
at the world.
Instinct is
but
a
that
voice
didn't
older
stop the
than
nightmares. When it
I
was
stopped
stopped listening
filming.
for months.
Compassion
Every
is
time I
noble,
turned
but
on the
blind
camera,
trust
in the
froze.
dark can
My
cost more than
followers kept
courage.
asking where I'd
It can
gone.
cost survival.
Some guessed family trouble.
Some cries for help
Others
or
said
warnings
burnout.
meant to save you. I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. The silence of the house, once peaceful, now pressed in like a second skin. The kids went to school.
I've worked night
Ryan
deliveries
worked
for
from
almost
home when
6
he
years.
could. But at
It's
night,
quiet
when the
work,
wind picked up,
pays the bills,
the
and
memories
gives
came
me
calling
time to
back.
think.
Sometimes I'd
The
wake
break
at
at
3
night are
a.m.
usually
convinced
my
I
kind
heard
of
footsteps.
peace.
No
Sometimes
traffic,
I'd dream of
no
tape,
calls from the
tight,
boss,
unbreakable,
just
and
me,
wake gasping
the
for
hum
air.
of the van, and
There
the
would be
glow
help.
of the dashboard.
Slowly.
My counselor
But that
told me
peace turns fragile.
control
when you
is
spend
how we
too many
survive,
nights
but
alone on the
acceptance
road.
is how we heal. Sometimes it feels
So
like
I
the
began
dark is
small.
listening. Taking
That
walks
Friday
again.
started like any
Learning
other.
to breathe through the panic. I'd clocked in
Eventually,
around
I
5.
posted
I told
a
video, Pine Bite
not about
Eats,
decor or recipes,
a small
but about
delivery
fear.
hub tucked behind a gas
Real
station
fear.
at the edge of town. I talked about what it does.
We
to
serviced
you,
all the mountain
how it
cabins
lingers,
scattered
how it
through the
changes
valley.
the way you see the world.
Around 11:30
the video
p.m.,
went viral.
I got a late night order.
Thousands of people
Chili
messaged
and
me.
cornbread from a Marty's
Some with
diner.
stories worse than
One
mine.
of our
Some
regulars.
thanking me for saying what they
The
couldn't.
address looked new.
That night I cried
72
again.
Hollow Creek Road.
But this time it wasn't from
Never
fear.
heard of that one.
It was release.
I muttered.
A year passed before
Tina,
I could
our
stand
dispatcher,
outside during a
glanced at her
storm
screen.
again. When
Customer
it finally
must be
came,
way out.
lightning
Says leave
splitting
on
the
porch.
sky, rain
You
hammering
okay
the
taking
roof.
it?
I stood at
Yeah,
the window and
I
watched. Last run anyway. The house
The
was
bag
different
smelled
now.
good. Still
Not just the
warm.
locks or the cameras,
I
but
loaded
something
it up,
deeper,
grabbed a
stronger.
thermos of coffee,
Ryan
and set
held
off.
my hand.
The kids
GPS
left
showed a
upstairs,
40-minute
counting
drive
thunder
into
like
the
a
back
game.
country. And for the first
The
time,
road twisted
the
past
sound
pine
didn't make
forests
my
and
chest
creeks
tighten.
that glittered faintly
I
in the
realized
moonlight.
then that the storm never really
The
left
air
me.
grew
It just
colder,
changed shape.
the fog thicker.
It became the reminder that
My
safety
cell
isn't
signal
guaranteed.
dropped to a single bar.
That we live in a world
Then
where
nothing.
even good people can face
I
bad
kept driving.
nights. But also that fear
That's
doesn't
when I
have to
saw it.
define the rest
A
of our
tall figure
lives.
standing dead
That night
center
I
in
made
the road
another
ahead,
video, half hidden by
no
fog.
filters, no background music.
I slowed
Just
down,
me,
rolled
my
my
voice
window
steady
an inch.
under the sound of rain.
Hey,
You waiting for
sometimes,
food?
I said. The scariest
No
stories
answer.
are the ones that happen
I
in the
blinked.
quietest places, and the figure was
But surviving
them? That's
Just
where real
fog
strength
lives.
swirling in my headlights.
And as thunder rolled through the
my
hills,
pulse
I
kicked
believed
up.
it.
Probably
Evil
just
often
the
hides
mist,
in
I
plain
told myself.
sight.
And fear can
But my
find
gut said
even in our
otherwise.
safest spaces.
But strength
A mile
isn't the
later,
absence
the
of fear.
GPS announced
It's the
I'd
choice
reached
to
the
keep
address.
living, trusting, and
A
rebuilding
dark
after
cabin
it passes.
sat off to the right. No
Always
lights,
guard
no
what you
cars,
share.
nothing.
Value your safety
The
over
porch
your image,
sagged
and
under
remember,
years of rain.
storms don't last
I
forever,
grabbed the
but the
bag
light
that
walked up
followed
the
is
steps and
always
froze.
yours to claim.
Carved into the door was something sharp where the words, "Leave it where you found me." A chill ran through me so deep it hurt. I dropped the food, stumbled back to the van,
They say
and
New
floored
York
it all
never
the way
sleeps,
down the
but
mountain.
from the
34th floor, it
When I
almost
finally
looks
reached
peaceful.
the main highway,
The
my
taxis
hands
are
were
still
little dots
shaking.
of gold.
I pulled
The
into the
sirens
just
just
faint
faint
24 hour to breathe.
glass.
I used to
The
love
clerk,
that view.
an older guy named
the skyline
Jim,
glittering
eyed me.
against the Hudson like it was
You
alive.
look like you saw a ghost.
When I first started babysitting for the Johnsons,
Maybe I did.
thought I'd made it.
I muttered.
I was
trying to
20,
laugh it off.
studying
Back
psychology
at the depot,
at
the clock
NYU,
read 1:12
and broke
a.m.
enough to take any
Tina
gig
was
that
logging
didn't involve
orders.
flipping eggs at
I
a
handed
diner.
her my keys.
The Johnsons were the kind of
I'm
people
done.
who sent Christmas
She
cards in
frowned.
embossed envelopes.
You didn't mark the
Peter
delivery
Johnson ran a
complete.
tech firm downtown. His wife Elaine taught
the
art
GPS
history at
froze.
Columbia. She
They
turned
had
her
2
monitor
kids.
toward me. Oliver, 8,
That
and little
address you
Maisie,
went
4.
to?
Polite,
Hollow
bright,
Creek.
and funny in that
It's not in the system
private school
anymore.
way. What do you mean? Every Friday they went
It
out to
vanished
some
after
work
you
dinner
left.
or gallery
There's
event,
no order under
and
your
I got
route
paid
number.
$50 an hour to order
pulled up my
sushi and
phone.
make sure the kids brushed
The
their
delivery
teeth.
receipt was gone too.
I liked their
Replaced by
apartment.
an old
It
archive
smelled
ticket
like a theater
dated
and expensive
2014.
candles. The doorman
Under
always
delivery
greeted me
address.
by name. It read, when I told my
Hollow
mom
Creek
where I was
cabin.
working, she said,
Abandoned after
"Honey, you
fatal
couldn't be
accident."
safer than 30 floors
Tina
up in a
gave a
building
little
like
whistle.
that." Weird
She
glitch,
wasn't
huh?
wrong.
Not then. I didn't answer. That Friday started like
That
any
night
other.
I dreamed of the
The air
figure
had
again.
that early winter bite, standing in the
kind
middle
that
of the
turns
road,
breath to smoke
whispering
before
in
the
a
first
voice
real
I couldn't
snow.
quite hear.
I came straight from campus, still
The
wearing
next
my
day,
gray
curiosity
NYU
got the
hoodie
better
and
of me.
jeans.
I
Elaine was
stopped
in a
by the
blue
library,
dress, rushing
figuring
to find her
maybe there'd be
earrings while
something
Peter
about Hollow
adjusted his
Creek in
tie.
old newspapers.
Nina, pizzas
The
in the
local
fridge.
history
Kids
clerk,
are already in
Mrs. Lanning,
pajamas, she said.
found it within
Kissing
minutes.
her daughter's forehead.
She slid a microfilm
We'll be
printout
back by
toward me.
midnight, maybe earlier.
Headline.
Peter added,
Local family
you know the
killed
alarm
in
code,
delivery
right?
crash.
It beeps
Driver,
when you open the door,
never
so
found.
don't panic if you hear it.
The article
I
dated back
smiled,
10
confident.
years. Got it, Mr.
It said
Johnson.
a food delivery van
By
lost
9,
control
the kids were
during a
asleep.
storm.
I
crashed
reheated
into
a
a cabin
cabin
off
pizza,
Hollow Creek Road,
scrolled through Netflix,
killing the
and settled
homeowner
on
and his
his
daughter,
daughter
whom I'd
instantly.
already seen twice. The driver's body was
Around
never
11, I
recovered.
made tea,
Wrapped
I
myself in a
swallowed
blanket
hard
and let my eyes drift shut
Was
to the
his name
sound
Carlos?
of city wind against the glass.
Mrs. Lanning
The
shook
sound
her
that
head.
woke me was soft.
No,
One small,
it says
polite
David
Martinez.
For a second, I thought it was
Close.
the microwave
Too
or
close.
maybe my phone.
Then
That
I
night,
realized
I sat
what
in
it
my
was.
van outside my
The door
apartment,
alarm.
staring
My
at the
stomach
fog
tightened.
rolling down from
I
the
sat up
hills.
slowly,
My
blinking
phone
against the
pinged.
TV's glow.
No caller ID.
The digital
Just a
clock on the wall
notification
read
from the delivery
11:47
app.
p.m.
Hollow
The
Creek
Johnsons
cabin.
weren't due home
Delivery
yet.
incomplete.
Mr. Johnson,
I threw the
I
phone
called,
onto
voice
the
trembling
passenger
just a
seat.
little.
My
No
headlights
answer.
flickered twice.
I
then
stood my
steadied.
bare feet quiet on the
For a
marble
moment
floor
in
in
the
the
rearview
rearview mirror
mirror.
hallway.
I swore I saw
A
someone
faint
sitting in the
draft
back
swept through
seat.
the apartment.
When I
Cold air
turned
that didn't
around,
belong
it
there.
was empty. Then a man's voice,
By
low and
Sunday,
uneven,
I
echoed from the
decided I
darkness
couldn't
near the
ignore it.
entryway. You shouldn't
Whether
be
it was
here.
a glitch, a
I
prank, or
froze.
something worse.
My first thought
I had
was
Peter's
Peter's brother
brother
or
or
someone
someone
else
else
with a key.
I left early
But there was
morning.
something in the
Fog
tone.
still heavy in the
Slow,
hollows.
deliberate,
The
almost
road
rehearsed.
twisted the same way as before.
I ducked
Though
behind
this
the
time
kitchen
the
island,
GPS
heart
wouldn't
slamming
even
in my
load.
chest.
The
My
trees
hand
seemed
shook
closer.
as I grabbed my phone
like
and
the
whispered.
forest was leaning in.
911. When I
The
reached
operator's
the spot,
voice came
there was
calm
no
and professional.
Only a burned-out
911, what's your
foundation swallowed
emergency?
by weeds.
There's someone
But
in the
something
apartment.
glinted near the
I
ashes.
whispered.
A melted
I'm
food
babysitting.
bag. 34th
I picked
floor,
it up.
240
Still half
Riverside
intact.
Tower. And nearly
The door
dropped
alarm
it
went
when I
off.
saw my own
I heard a
handwriting
man.
on the sticker.
Stay on the line, ma'am.
Is anyone
Order.
else in the apartment?
6427.
Yes, the kids.
Upstairs
Carlos are.
sleeping.
As I said
hadn't
it, my
written
eyes
that.
flicked to the
I'd never
baby
used
monitor
that number.
propped beside the sink.
A
whisper brushed my
The
ear.
screen showed 2 quiet
Leave
rooms
it where you
bathed
found
in
me.
nightlight glow.
I bolted
Then
back to the
static rolled
van, but
across
the
it.
engine refused
White
to
noise,
start.
lines of interference.
The radio crackled
For a
alive with
heartbeat, the
static.
image cleared, and I saw
Through
a
the
face.
static came a
Not
voice,
Oliver.
low and broken.
Not anyone I recognized.
Delivery
A
complete.
man's face,
Finally,
pale.
close to the
Then
camera,
silence.
staring straight into it. The van roared
Then
to
the
life,
feed went
headlights
black.
blinding for a second before
gasped,
cutting off
clapping
on
a
their
hand
own.
over my mouth.
The
The
next evening,
dispatcher
Tina
was saying
called.
something I barely
Hey,
heard.
weird thing.
My breath came
The
short
system
and
marked
fast.
your Hollow Creek delivery
Nina,
as
I
completed.
told myself.
Time
You
stamped
need to move now.
1217A.
I crawled toward the
AM
hallway,
last
every
night.
nerve screaming to run. I wasn't even out.
The
I
man's
said.
footsteps echoed faintly
Well, it
from
logged
the other
your
end of
vehicle
the
ID.
apartment.
Slow,
She paused,
confident like he knew
and the
exactly
tip
where he was
cleared.
going.
I quit
There was
that
no way
night.
out except the front
I
door
couldn't
or the
keep
balcony.
driving those roads.
The elevator
not
needed a
knowing
key
what
card
was out
and
there,
the stairwell was
or who
beyond
might
the
still
living
be
room.
waiting. Too exposed.
Sometimes when the fog rolls
thought
into
about the
town, I
kids.
hear the faint chime
I
of my
couldn't
old
leave them.
delivery app
The
notification.
dispatcher's voice
New
came
order
through again.
available.
Ma'am,
Ma'am,
officers
officers
are on their way.
I never
Stay
accept
hidden.
it.
Do not engage.
But part of me wonders
I
if
reached
someone
the
else
base of
will.
the stairs, heart pounding.
Not every
A
unfinished
light
task
flicked
is
on
yours to
upstairs.
complete.
Maisie's room.
Someplace
places
Then I heard her
and
small
some people
voice
belong
half
to the
asleep.
past.
Nina?
And trying to deliver
The
what
man's
was lost
footsteps
can trap
quickened.
you there too.
Stay in your room, sweetie.
Curiosity may push you
I
down
shouted,
dark
then
roads,
cursed myself for making
but wisdom
noise.
is knowing when to
He
turn
was on the
around.
stairs now.
I saw his silhouette, broad shoulders, dark jacket, moving with awful
It's
calm.
strange how quiet a city
I
can
grabbed
feel
the
when the
nearest
night
thing I
finally
could,
gives
a
up trying
ceramic
to
mug
pretend
from
it's
the counter,
alive,
and
I'd
hurled it.
always liked walking home
It shattered
after late
against the wall
nights.
beside him.
The hum of
He
distant
flinched but kept
traffic,
coming.
the smell
That's
of
when
rain
the
on
baby
pavement,
monitor flickered back
the way
on
every
for a
sound
moment.
feels sharper
I
when
saw
the streets
Oliver's
are
bed
empty.
Panic
That
knifed
night
through
threw
me
me
until
until
a
a
small
small hand tugged my
I
sleeve.
was leaving my friend
I
Caleb's
turned,
apartment after
Oliver
helping him
wide-eyed
move
whispering,
furniture and splitting a
"I heard
six-pack.
something.
Nothing
What's
unusual.
happening?"
Shh,
I wasn't
I
drunk,
mouthed.
just tired.
Hide behind
The
me.
streets around
The man
downtown
reached
were
the
empty
bottom step.
except for the
He
occasional
was
passing
maybe
bus.
mid-30s, unshaven.
Its windows
Eyes
reflecting
cold and
slices
wet
of
looking.
orange light.
He smiled.
Small,
It was
joyless.
close to midnight
Where
when I
is she?
turned down Maple
He
Avenue.
said. I had no idea what he
stretch
meant.
that cut straight
Who?
to my apartment
He didn't
building.
answer.
I
The air
backed
was
toward
cool.
the balcony,
My
tugging
breath
all over
forming
with
pale
me.
clouds in front
The
of me.
city's cold air seeped
My
through the
footsteps
sliding glass
echoed off the
door.
buildings, bouncing
If I could
back
get out
like
there,
I wasn't
maybe I
alone.
could climb over to the neighbor's unit.
Every streetlight I
or at
passed
least
hummed
hummed
softly.
until police arrived.
A low electric buzz, but
I yanked
halfway
the
down the
handle,
block,
the door
doors starting
groaning
to flicker,
open.
wind roaring in.
Underneath that
the man
flickering light
lunged, and
stood
then
a man.
suddenly from the hall, red and
He was
blue lights
facing away
strove
from
through
me.
the windows, head slightly tilted
Police,
like he was
freeze.
looking at something
He
across the
bolted
street.
toward the balcony railing.
I
In
slowed
one
my pace,
terrifying
pretending
motion,
to check my phone.
he swung his leg over
His
and
clothes were
disappeared
dark
into
and
the
a long
night.
coat, maybe
They
a
found
hood.
his footprints
I
on the
couldn't
balcony
tell
the
from
next
that
morning.
distance. Wet boot
For some
marks
reason,
in
I
one
felt
part,
like I
a
shouldn't get
palm print on the
closer.
rail. My brain whispered
The officers told me he'd
climbed up from the
so I
33rd
crossed to the
floor,
opposite sidewalk
then
and
broke
kept
in
walking.
through the Johnson's
That's when
sliding
the light
door.
stopped flickering.
Elaine arrived home
It went
around
steady,
1 a.m.
humming louder.
Pale and
I
shaking
glanced
when she
back
saw the
once,
flashing
then he was
lights.
gone, just
she
gone.
pulled Oliver into her
I
arms
told
while
myself
sat
he
on the
probably
couch
walked
wrapped
off
in a
when I
blanket.
wasn't looking.
When the detective
People
asked for my
disappear into
statement, my
alleyways
voice
all the
sounded
time.
far away even to
Still,
me.
I sped up, trying to shake the
He said I
unease
shouldn't
crawling
be
up
here.
my spine.
He knew
But
where
a
the
few
baby
blocks
monitor
later, I heard
was.
it.
He
Footsteps behind me.
calm, soft,
The detective
dragging
nodded,
steps,
scribbling
perfectly
notes.
matching mine.
We'll check
When I
security
slowed,
footage.
they slowed.
Did he
When
take
I sped
anything?
up, they did too. No, I said. I turned a corner
Just scared the
sharply,
life out
half
of us.
expecting to catch
2
whoever it
days
was,
later,
but
I
the
got a
street
call
was
from
empty.
Detective Morales.
My reflection in a
His
darkened
tone was
shop
heavy.
window stared back
Nina,
at me.
we think we know who
Tired
the guy
eyes,
was.
messy hair,
Does
nervous
the name
smile.
Lucas Brent sound familiar?
You're fine, I
It
muttered.
didn't. Just
He's
tired.
the ex-boyfriend of their previous
By the time
nanny.
I reached my apartment
She was fired
building, I had
last
almost
month.
convinced myself
Some incident
nothing
with
was
the
wrong.
kids, minor stuff.
I fumbled for my
We
keys,
think he came
handshaking
back looking
slightly.
for her, didn't realize
when
when
a
a
voice
voice
whispered
whispered
right beside my ear.
I sat on the edge of
Close
my dorm
enough
bed.
that I felt the breath.
The city humming outside
dropped
my
something.
window. I froze.
So,
he thought
my
my
house
house keys were already in my
Looks
hand.
that way.
I turned
You were
around.
lucky,
No
Nina.
one.
He's got a
The street
record.
light above my
Assault
door
stalking.
flickered twice.
We've got
then
units
went
searching for
completely
him
dark.
now. I barely
Lucky.
slept that night.
The word rang in my
Every
ears.
creak of the
That night I
floorboards,
couldn't
every
sleep.
gust of wind
Every
against the
time I
windows
closed
made
my
heart
eyes, I
jump.
saw that pale face
When
in the
dawn
monitor.
finally came, I
The
laughed
dead
at
calm in
myself
his
for being
eyes.
paranoid.
I'd replay
Warning
the sound
light
as
as
a
a
way of
chime.
erasing fear.
The single beep that
At
changed
least until
everything.
the next sunset.
Weeks passed before
Work
I could
that
step
day
into
dragged.
another high-rise.
I work at a
The
repair
Johnsons
shop just
offered to
outside
pay
the
for
city
therapy
and even gave me a
Fixing
recommendation
phones,
letter.
laptops, the kind of job
I thanked
that's
them,
quiet
but
enough
told
to
them I
make you
wasn't
think too
babysitting
much.
anymore. Around noon,
Instead, I
Caleb
started
texted
volunteering
Caleb at a campus hotline.
You get home all right last
helping
night?
students who'd had
Me,
scares
yeah,
of
why?
their own. Caleb, one girl
Thought I
had
saw you
woken to
talking
find
to
her
someone
roommate's ex
outside.
trying to get in
That
through the
froze
fire
me.
escape.
I didn't reply.
Another had been followed
I hadn't
from the
spoken to
subway for
anyone.
3 blocks. When I left work that evening,
Each
it was
story
already
felt
different,
dark.
but carried the same
I
weight.
told myself to take
that
the bus
invisible
this time.
shiver of what if. No more late night walks. In February, Detective
somehow I
Morales
ended
called
up
on the
again.
same street again.
We got him, he said
Maple
simply.
Avenue, my mind
An anonymous
rationalizing
tip.
it as facing
He's in
fear.
custody.
Halfway down the
I
block,
thanked him,
but it didn't
under
feel
that
like
same
victory.
streetlight,
More
there was
like
something
closing a
small
door
on the
that
ground.
should have never been opened.
My curiosity
Sometimes
got the
late at
better of
night,
me.
I still think about
I
that
crouched
apartment.
down and saw it
the
was
scent
a
of
Harry
city
keychain.
candles.
A
The
cheap
hush of the
metal tag
elevator
with the
ride
number
up 208
the
engraved
skyline
below. Stretching endless
My apartment
below.
number.
From that height,
I stood
you
there
think
for
you're
a moment.
untouchable. Cold
But
spreading
danger
through my
doesn't care
chest.
how high you are.
I didn't drop
just
it.
finds another way
I'd
in.
never owned anything like
I've learned
that.
to trust my
I
instincts.
pocketed it, walked home
I've learned that
fast, and locked
safety isn't
every
a
bolt
floor
behind
number
me.
or a lock code.
That night,
It's
I heard
awareness,
faint tapping
presence,
sounds,
listening to the tiny
not from
alarms in
outside,
your own
but
chest,
from inside the
before the
walls.
real one ever sounds.
Like someone dragging a nail
Now, when I
slowly down the
babysit my niece
drywall.
back home in Jersey, I
tried
always
to
check
find
the
the windows
source
but
twice.
couldn't.
I
keep
keep
the phone
beside
beside
me.
the sound stopped. I still make tea and
My
watch
phone
Netflix
buzzed with a
but when
text
the
from
kettle
unknown
whistles, I
number.
smile a little. Unknown, because I'm awake. You shouldn't have taken what's not
Safety
yours.
isn't guaranteed by walls,
I showed
locks,
Caleb
or
the
height.
text the next day. It's built by
laughed
awareness,
it off.
preparation, and trust
Man,
in
it's
your
probably
instincts.
some scammer or prank.
Listen to
Just
the
block
quiet
the
signals.
numbers.
I
The
wanted to
uneasy
believe
feeling.
him. I
The
deleted
second
the
thought.
message, but
The
unease
faint
stuck
alarm
with me
before
like
the
static.
storm.
That evening
Because
when I got
sometimes
home, I
danger
noticed
doesn't
something
break the
wrong.
door down.
My front door
It
was
just walks
unlocked.
in when you stop paying
I was sure I'd
attention.
locked it that morning. Nothing seemed
stolen, but the air felt disturbed, like someone had stood in the middle of my living room for hours breathing. Later, I decided to take a shower, trying to wash away the tension.
I wanted a refuge.
The steam fogged up the mirror, and as I wiped it
Mexico,
with my hand, I froze.
or the
On the
tequila,
mirror, faint
or
but
even the
visible were
architecture.
finger streaks. It was
Two
for
words
quiet.
written in the condensation.
I'd spent 20 years
Drop it.
designing homes for people who
I stepped
measured their
back,
happiness by
heart
square
racing.
footage. My
Who
apartment
wanted
door was
walls to
locked
impress
now.
their friends
The deadbolt
instead of
secure.
protect their
How the
hearts.
hell could anyone have been inside?
I told myself
I
I was
grabbed the
different,
keychain from
that
my
I could
pocket
build
and
something
threw it in the
honest,
trash.
something transparent.
That night, So when Camilla and I found the land outside Guadalajara, volume low, a hillside around 1 a.m. my bathroom light turned on by brittle grass. Then I knew it was meant for glass. Again, low and steady. No secrets, like it was coming from just behind my ear. Everything visible. You dropped something. Camilla smiled the way she always did when she didn't agree, but avoiding Maple Avenue entirely. She was a painter, doesn't care about directions, and her studio back in San Diego my boss asked if I was canvases that looked like storms. Like hell, Daniel. Grays and greens collided. Beautiful, somebody's been screwing with me. He chuckled. When we moved, city life will do that. She packed only her brushes, and when I got home, I found an envelope finished to my door of our daughter, Lucia. Inside was a photo. I told her the glass house would inspire us, face half lit by headlights. For a while, it did. On the back, still the light was pure. That night, I couldn't stay in the sunrise like an ocean. I packed a bag and drove upstairs. You could see the entire valley. He laughed at my panic, but let me crash on his couch, tapping the windows. Around 2 a.m., while I was half asleep, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside his apartment. When life inside it isn't right, heavy. I started getting more commissions, more travel. The sound of something metal scraping across the floor. Caleb's dog started whining. Drinking more. The next morning, I told myself it was just a fresh scratch mark. She told me I was blind, like a key had been dragged across the metal. She'd say. A week later, I finally decided to report everything to the police. I laughed it off. The officer at the desk listened politely. The night everything fell apart began like all the others. Sounds like a prank, he said. Good wine, polite laughter, imagining that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I wasn't. When I got home, my apartment door was wide open. The valley air was warm and every light was off, the kind that makes you close under the flickering street light. I'd invited 2 clients from Mexico City and their wives. It was strobing in that same extravagant rhythm I remembered. Roasted chicken and white wine through the candles reflected in the glass walls. The man. Standing perfectly still, face hidden by his hood. She wore a blue dress. I held the Kelmy keychain wound the one I smiled at all the right moments. I called 911 too loudly before they could answer. The light went out. I remember her filling her wine glass again and again. Whisper, hands steady, from my ear. Distant. You dropped the guests left around midnight. When the cops arrived, they found my apartment empty. You should lock up. The window was open, curtains swaying. That was our routine. No footprint upstairs. I'd forced entry and turn off the lights. Just a single keychain lying in the middle of the floor caught me. I moved out the next morning. Not anger. Not to this day, whenever I pass an empty street under a flickering light. The guest's taillights disappeared down the road. Not every shadow hides quiet, but not every act of poured myself a last drink and stood at the glass wall. Fear is often your body's way of telling you what logic refuses to accept. Always trust your reflection, especially when everything looks normal. Gray at the temples, a little heavier. The danger you ignore once might be the one that never lets you go. Just a flicker. I turned, nothing. That's when I saw the footprints, muddy, faint, trailing across the white marble from the back door. I've been driving long haul for close to 20 years, that the road still feels like home to me. But they were too small for me. To the hum of tires on asphalt. Camilla? The steady drone of diesel. No answer. The way the sky stretches forever across the plains. Went dead. I felt a coldness I can't describe. Behind the wheel, the highway stops being a place you travel through. Older, deeper, starts being a place you live in. That was the life I chose. The stairs, my name's pounding in my throat. And this story happened on a bitter January night somewhere in the middle of Kansas. The curtains fluttered in the wind. I left Kansas City just after sunset with a trailer full of auto parts bound for Denver. And a note written in Camilla's handwriting. Dispatch wanted me there by noon the next day. The house when you lied to me. The forecast called for snow out west. By the time the police arrived, the night was clearing up. Cold enough that the air stabbed at your lungs if you stepped outside. Safe. But the kind of cold that made the stars look like diamonds. Camilla had dropped her off around midnight. I hadn't seen another vehicle for an hour. Kissed her on the forehead. Out there, the plane stretched so far you feel like you're driving across an ocean. Her car turned up near the bridge on Route 80. The only light came from my headlights in the faint red glow of my dashboard. Purse inside. The CB radio had been silent most of the night. I kept it on channel 19 out of habit. I sat in the police station. But after midnight, truckers are usually either asleep or too tired to talk. When did you last see your wife? A low hiss came through, followed by a faint voice. Why did she leave the baby? Do you see me? I gave them the same answers until the words felt meaningless. Nothing but static. I told them about the note. Probably some kid with a handheld messing around. Polite with tired eyes nodded slowly. I turned the squelch down and kept rolling. A lie? He asked. The road went on forever. I said I didn't know what she meant. Framed by snow-covered fields, telephone poles flicking past like metronome ticks. A woman I'd hired once long before Camilla and I left California. I didn't know why it bothered me, but a stupid flirtation that meant less than a shadow, a glimmer of light appeared. Camilla had found the messages months later. As I got closer, I realized it was another truck, but I knew she never really had. An older Peterbilt, maybe late 70s. After the police released hazards, drove back to flashing. The valley sun flared like they were dying. From a distance, down, instinctively reaching for the mic. But inside, it felt like a museum. You all right up there, driver? The empty crib, no answer. The half-finished bottle of wine, tried again. The muddy footprints, everything was evidence of something broken. When you've been in this line of work as long as I have. That night I couldn't sleep. You look out for your own. I walked from room to room, turning off lights of nowhere, and that kind of cold can kill a man. The house creaked in the wind. I pulled onto the shoulder behind him and grabbed my flashlight. Dead since that night hit me like a hammer the moment I stepped out. A whisper faint and distorted. The Peterbilt looked rough. Old paint, cracked mirrors, snow crusted on the steps. I told myself it was the driver's door was closed, but the engine was still running. When I checked the monitor's camera feed, the screen like it hadn't been tuned in years. Showed the nursery. I climbed up the step and knocked on the door, and for a split second, a reflection in the glass door. The door was silhouette, long hair, inside the cab light was on. Then the driver's seat was empty. Weeks passed. A thermos. Camilla's disappearance made local news for a while, then faded. On the dash lay a worn leather wallet and into the logbook. Washed downstream. The seatbelt was unbuckled, hanging loose. But I knew they hadn't found a body because they hadn't looked hard enough, my light around, or because she didn't want to be found. Was empty. No sign of struggle. I stayed in the house because I couldn't leave it. No footprints leading away. It was my penance. Just tire tracks and untouched snow. Every night I felt a chill crawl up my neck that had nothing to do with doors closing softly. Something about that still warm coffee hit me wrong. I stopped drawing. Whoever had been here couldn't have gone stopped calling. Maybe he'd stepped out to take a leak to pick up Lucia's toys. Maybe he'd gone for help. She looked around the house and shook her head. Just dark fields and fences buried in snow. She told me once it felt like living inside a mirror on the tree line. You can see the shadows look deeper than they should have. That night I found her phone. For a moment I thought I saw movement. It had been hidden behind a drawer in the nursery between the trees, wrapped in a scarf. But then it was gone. The battery was dead, but when I charged it, I found dozens of voicemails on the snow. Most I climbed into my own truck, locked both doors, and sat there with the engine idling before she vanished. My hands were trembling slightly as I picked up the mic. I see him sometimes. The man he used to be before the lies. I said, voice tight. Before the house. Anybody hear me? I don't think he knows how much he's lost on I-70 Maybe this is the only way to make him see. Had an abandoned rig engine running. I didn't drive that night. Static. I couldn't. Then faintly. The next morning I went to the bridge. Stopped. The air was cold. The water still. I stood where her car had been found. Watching the reflection of the hills, my voice shaking. Only the hiss of static answered. The house wasn't glassed to show the world threw the rig into gear and pulled back glass to convince ourselves we had nothing. The road ahead was a long, transparency without truth is just exposure. A year later, I pushed the pedal harder than I should have, just wanting distance between me and that truck. Too much tragedy attached to my ears, louder than the engine. I finally bought it back. I told myself it had to be some sick prank. I replaced every glass wall with a channel messing with me. I wanted maybe the guy from that truck had a second see shatter woods and thought it'd be funny. People thought I was crazy, didn't buy it, but I needed walls that could hold secrets, not display them. I live there. You shouldn't have stopped. The same voice stays with her aunt. Sometimes she visits on weekends. Closer. She's 5 now. Like it was coming from inside the cab. She doesn't remember her mother, but she asks about her sometimes. I barked, slamming the volume knob. Did Mommy like this house? My palms were slick on the steering wheel. She liked the view. The road dipped slightly, and my headlights down the hallway. Her laughter echoes off the concrete. At first, it looked like a deer. Glass. It's duller, quieter, 2 legs, not 4. Some nights I still dream of Camilla. The tires screaming against the window, humming softly. Standing in the beam, she looks up. Smiles. He was drenched from head to toe. You finally water built dripping off him, clothes clinging to his body. I wait to silence. His skin looked gray in the light of dawn seeping through the narrow windows I left uncovered. Brown canvas with a valley lies below, same as ever. I'd seen it hanging on the seat in that abandoned distance. Sometimes I drive there, park, and walk down to the river. I slam the horn and the stand where they found her car, and I wait for a sign. The man didn't move. None ever comes. Just stared at me. But the waiting itself has become its own kind of peace. He was trying to recognize me. The house no longer feels haunted. He raised his arm and pointed down the road. It feels empty in a way I can live with. That was enough. Maybe that's the closest thing to forgiveness. I threw the truck into reverse, backed up until my trailer straightened. Truth isn't about visibility, it's about drive and swerved around him. You can build walls of glass, expose every inch of your life to the world. But if what's inside is false, the transparency becomes just another disguise. By the time I hit the next rest stop, my nerves were showing everything. I parked under the brightest light I could find. Engine still running. Emilio built a house without secrets, but learned too late that secrets don't vanish when you make them visible. The world was silent except for the low rumble of idling engines from a couple of other trucks. In love, in art, in life, I wasn't alone here. The foundation that endures isn't inside the rest area. The fluorescent light buzzed. A woman behind the counter looked up from her phone. "Rough night?" she asked. "You could say that," I said, grabbing a coffee. "You seen any other trucks stop through lately?" I never thought silence could be Peterbilt, rust-colored, but after David died, it became the loudest thing in my life. Last week after a wreck east of here. The house we built together sat on the edge of the Scottish Highlands. A wreck, a gray stone cottage where the roof that sighed when the wind pushed against it. They say he lost control on the ice and the place had a heartbeat of its own. Poor guy. The creaks, the whistles, the subtle shifting of the old 212. When he passed, those sounds turned from comfort to reminding else. Every creak was a ghost coffee and stepped from room to room. Snow was starting to fall again. I'd lived there alone for 2 years, light but steady. People asked why I didn't move closer to town, but I couldn't bear to leave what we made. I climbed into the cab and stretched for miles around the cottage. A sea of heather and mist that swallowed the world at night. I turned the radio back on. My nearest neighbor was half a mile away, and most days I preferred it that way. For a long time, nothing happened that I could control. You see me now? Until I couldn't. I dropped the mic. That November, storms rolled in from the coast, tearing across the hills like wild animals. I
The
swore
wind
I
never
saw
stopped.
someone standing
It
by the
clawed
tail
at the
of my
windows
trailer
and
rattled the roof
the
slates.
outline of a man.
I spent those
Shoulders
nights by the
hunched,
fire,
head bowed,
wrapped in one of David's old
I
flannel
blinked and he was
blankets,
gone.
reading whatever book
I left
could
the rest
manage to
area
focus
before
on.
dawn.
The
That
night
night
was no
stopped,
different,
leaving
until
a pale
it was.
mist that hugged the ground.
The power flickered just past
I drove
10.
without the radio
The
on,
light stuttered and
without
died,
music, without
leaving the
anything
house
but
in
the
a
sound
shroud
of the
of
engine
firelight.
and my own breathing. I sighed, grabbed
When I
another
reached
log,
Denver,
and
I
told
dropped my
myself the
load, signed
generator
the
would kick in
papers, and
soon.
parked the rig at the
It
yard.
didn't. I
Then
sat
under
there
the
for a
hum of
long
the
time
storm,
before
I heard
shutting
it.
off the key. The soft
The
click of
silence
the
was
garden
deafening.
gate. That
It
night
was a
in my
sound
motel
I knew
room, I
well.
couldn't sleep. The squeaky
Every
hinge,
time
the
I
dull
closed
thud
my
of
eyes, I
voice
saw
on the
that
latch.
man, dripping, pointing,
No
eyes
animal could
hollow.
make that. I
Someone
kept
was
replaying
outside.
it, wondering if
I
I'd
told myself
imagined
it was
all.
the wind, maybe a
Stress,
loose latch,
fatigue,
but my
the
stomach
isolation
didn't
of the
believe
road,
me.
and they can mess with your
The
head.
second stretched, the
That's
fire
what I told
cracked,
myself.
and then came the knock.
But a week later,
slow, deliberate,
I stopped
human.
at a diner off I-70 and
Missed
overheard
a
two
man's
drivers
voice called
talking
through
at the
the
counter.
counter.
Crazy
I think I'm
story,
lost.
one said. My car
They
broke
found a
down.
Peterbilt
Please.
out near 212
Every
again.
hair on my arm
Empty
stood
cab,
up.
engine running.
I took a
Cops
breath,
say the
forcing my
driver's
voice
rig
to
was
stay
stolen
even.
and found miles away.
I'll call
Doors
someone
open.
for you. No sign of
You
him.
can't,
I didn't
he
say a
said.
word. I just
There's
paid
no
my service
bill.
out here, walked out and
He
climbed
wasn't
into my
wrong.
truck. The signal
Before I
dropped
started
during
the
engine,
engine,
I
I
looked at the passenger
But the way
seat.
he said it, like he already
Lying there
knew,
was an
made me
old
step
wet leather
back.
wallet. The latch jiggled
I hadn't
once.
noticed it before.
Please. My
He
hand
said
started
again.
to shake. And this
The
time the
CB
word
crackled.
didn't sound like a plea.
Do you see me?
It sounded like
That
a
was the
command.
last time I ever drove
grabbed
that stretch
the
of
fireplace
highway.
poker. Sometimes
My
the road
hand
isn't
trembled.
empty. It
I
remembers.
didn't answer.
Out there
After
in
a
the
few
dark,
moments
where
of
silence
silence,
stretches
I heard
farther than
gravel
the
crunch.
horizon, footsteps
You learn the
moving away.
value of trusting your
I
instincts.
waited for relief
When
to
something
come,
feels
but it
wrong,
didn't.
it usually is.
Because minutes
Curiosity
later, a
may be
window
part of
upstairs
human
creaked
nature.
open. But some things are better
creak
left
from
alone.
upstairs wasn't
In
loud,
life, as on the
but
highway.
in that dead quiet,
not every call for help
it
comes
might as
from
well
a
have been
living
a scream.
and not every silence
I
means you're
froze
alone.
by
The
the
fire, listening. David, I whispered before I caught myself. Habit. I moved to the foot of the stairs, poker still in hand, every instinct
It's
screaming
funny how
that
you can
I
live
shouldn't
somewhere
go up
for
there,
years and still not really
but
see
doing
it
nothing
until
was
you're
worse.
alone at night.
I climbed
I've been
each
working
step
at Ruby's
slowly,
diner since I
feeling
was
no
19.
complaint under my weight.
Just a small place off
The second
Highway
floor
14.
hallway was dim,
famous for our
lit only by
pancakes
the
and
moonlight
bottomless
leaking
coffee.
through the curtains.
I was 27
The sound
now,
had come
still
from
there.
the guest room,
still working
the
the
one
late
we hadn't
shift that
used
ran
since
before
until 2 in
David
the
got
morning.
sick.
Most
When I
nights
reached
the
the
world
door
outside
outside,
felt like an old photograph.
The window was open just
quiet,
an inch,
washed out, and
wind
slightly
pushing the
crooked around
curtains
the
like
edges.
breath.
My
Raindrops
walk
hit the
home
sill.
usually took about
My
30
heart
minutes
pounded
if I
so
stayed
hard
on the
I
main
thought it would
road.
break through my ribs.
But that route
I
past the
crossed
empty
the room
lumber
and
yard
slammed
and
the
a
window
stretch of
shut,
half
twisting the
houses
lock
that
tight.
always made me feel
Then I
warm.
checked the others and all locked.
The shortcut,
Nothing disturbed.
a narrow alley
Maybe
between
it was
two
the wind,
abandoned
I thought.
brick warehouses.
Maybe the latch was loose,
shaved
or maybe
minutes off. Maybe he had been telling
It wasn't
the truth.
exactly safe looking.
I forced
But I'd
myself to
walked
look
it
outside.
so many times I could
The
picture
storm
every
had
crack
calmed
in the
just
pavement.
enough to see the dark
The air
outline
always
of the
smelled
yard.
faintly of wet cement and
The
old
gate hung
rain.
open, swaying
That
back
night
and
I
forth.
clocked out at
No
2:12
figure,
a.m.
no movement. The
I went
diner's
back
neon
downstairs,
sign flickered
keeping
as
the
I
poker
stepped
close.
outside. My phone
It
still
was
had no
drizzling,
signal, but I tried
just
anyway.
enough to paint the
Nothing.
asphalt in streaks of orange from the
Okay,
streetlights.
I said aloud, like
I
saying
tugged
it would
my
make it
jacket
real.
tighter and started
He's gone.
walking.
It's
My
over.
sneakers squeaking
I didn't
in the
believe
puddle.
myself. I
thought
threw another
about how
log
I'd
on the
spend my
fire
day
and
off
sat by the
tomorrow,
window, waiting for
maybe
dawn.
sleep in, maybe
trying
finally
not to
fix
look
the
at the
leaky
shadows
faucet
that
in the
stretched
kitchen.
across the walls. The town was quiet,
But around
except for
midnight
the
I
hum
saw
of a
something
passing
move
truck
outside.
somewhere far off. A flicker of light.
I turned
like
onto
someone's
Cherry
flashlight
Avenue
sweeping
where the
across
alley
the
began.
field. The rain made the
Then
world
another.
feel smaller.
2 of them.
The sound of it bouncing off the
searching.
brick walls like
I
whispers.
didn't sleep.
I remember
I couldn't.
glancing up. The
I
clouds
watched
hung
from
low,
the window, keeping
heavy,
the fire
like
low,
they
every
wanted to
sense
crush the
sharpened by
rooftops.
fear.
Halfway
The
through, I
flashlights
heard it
moved
slowly
slowly
through
through
the
the
fog.
steady.
I
Not
stopped.
random, not lost.
The sound stopped too, searching
I
with
turned
purpose.
around, nobody.
2 figures,
Just the
both
slick
tall,
stretch of
both
wet
in dark
pavement
coats,
and the faint orange
one
glow
carried something
reflecting
long,
off the puddles.
maybe a tool.
I
maybe
let out
worse.
a shaky breath.
I thought of
Told
calling
myself
myself
it was
again,
just
but there
my
was
echo,
still no
or maybe
signal.
the drip of water from a
The
drain
landline
pipe.
had been dead for months.
I'd been up for 12
The storm
hours
last
straight.
spring had torn the
My
cable
mind
and I
played
hadn't
tricks
fixed it.
sometimes.
I
started
whispered to
walking
myself,
again,
"You're
faster this
fine.
time. Just stay
But
quiet.
the sound returned, a closer,
The quiet
quicker,
wasn't
matching
protection
me.
anymore.
I could hear
Quiet
breathing
was a
now.
trap.
Low and
After an
uneven,
hour,
like
the
someone
light
trying
vanished.
not to be heard.
I waited, counting
My
them
stomach
and
tightened,
straining to hear
the air
anything
seemed
beyond the
thicker.
wind. I spun
Nothing.
around again, and that's when I
At
saw
some
it.
point, exhaustion
A silhouette
caught me.
crouched against the
I
wall
must have
near a
dozed in the
dumpster.
chair because the next
Wide
thing I knew,
eyes catching the
pale
streetlight.
morning light
I
seeped through the
froze.
curtains.
Then instinct took over.
The
I
storm had
ran.
passed. My
I
shoes
checked the yard.
splashed through puddles as I
Footprints
tore
dotted
down the
the mud
last
from the
stretch
gate
of
to
the
the
alley.
porch.
My
And
heart
then around
pounding
the
so
side of
loud
the
it
house.
drowned everything else out.
They had been
I burst
there.
onto Maple Street.
I didn't
gasping,
even bother
clutching my
changing
bag
out
to
of
my
my
flannel
chest.
pants.
When I finally turned back,
I grabbed
the
my
figure
coat
hadn't
and keys
moved.
and drove
It
straight
stood
to
perfectly
town.
still. No, not stood.
The sheriff's office
was
in
posed.
Invermore was small,
And as the light
just a
shifted,
single
I saw
story
the shine
brick
of
building
molded
that always
plastic.
smelled faintly of
A
coffee
mannequin.
and damp paper.
But not just any mannequin.
Sheriff Haynes had known
It was
David
wearing a
and me
Ruby's
for
Diner
years.
uniform.
When I told him
White
what
shirt,
happened,
red
he
apron,
frowned
name
but
tag.
didn't look surprised.
My name tag.
You sure it wasn't just
By the
travelers?
time I got home, I
Storm
was
like
shaking
that,
so
folks
hard
get
I could
stranded
barely
all the
get my
time.
keys into the door.
Travelers don't
I
open
told myself
windows,
it
I
was
said
a prank.
sharply. Some
Besides,
kids, maybe
scribbling
someone
notes.
from the diner messing
We'll
around.
send someone out to take
But
a
deep
look.
down, it didn't feel like
But
that.
Eleanor,
The mannequin's
far
face,
out,
blank, painted,
sometimes
frozen
wind
in a faint half smile, was burned into my mind. He nodded. The next morning, I barely slept. We'll check it out. When the sun came up, everything looked harmless again. That afternoon, like Deputy Collins drove out, took photos of the footprints. Still, when I walked into work, I found myself scanning the parking lot. They'd washed away in the rain, expecting to see that same plastic figure leaning against the wall. I wanted to believe it was over, but that night, when I looked out from the kitchen window, the gate was closed. You look like hell, Ellie, she said, sliding me a coffee. A week passed. Rough night? The storm didn't sleep much, I said, trying to settle back into its old rhythm. She gave me a look but didn't press. I told myself it was during the lunch rush I caught sight of something that made my stomach drop. I still checked the windows through the front window across the street. Then one Thursday I heard it was a shape. The click of the gate. Pale, standing I froze in the kitchen. The clock read 10:14 same p.m. uniform, same red apron. I turned off the lights, I blinked hard, pounding and peered through the crack in the curtain. A figure stood by the gate. I had convinced myself I was just exhausted.
Miss,
seeing
a voice
things,
called,
maybe even dreaming with my eyes open. It's me. But as I clocked out that night, I noticed something strange. Go away. My name tag, the one I wore every shift, was missing from my apron. That wasn't very nice. I checked my locker, my bag, even the counter, nothing. When the police arrived 20 minutes later, it was Jake, the line cook. Nothing. His voice always had this teasing edge. Circling the house. My name tag, I said. That was the last time I saw him. He shook his head. Maybe the last time I knew. Probably fell off somewhere. Sometimes when the wind shifts just right, I swear I still hear the click of that gate. Home. Fear is a quiet teacher. This time I avoided the alley and took the long roads outside, but the streets were nearly empty. Trust your instincts, but they exist for a reason. Every passing shadow mistake isolation for safety. When I reached my apartment, I locked the door, drew the curtains, never rewards those who ignore the sound of the gate. I kept telling myself it couldn't follow me, that it wasn't even real. But at 3:17 a.m., when I got up to get water, I saw something through the gap in my curtains. When Liam and I bought the house on Maple Drive, I thought we'd finally found peace. After years of renting my noisy apartments in the city, I called the quiet hum of suburban life felt like a gift. An officer, a young guy named Our place wasn't big, who looked too tired to care. Just a semi-detached house at the end of a cul-de-sac line with maples that flamed red every October. He wrote it all down. The kids could finally have a backyard, and I could finally sleep without sirens. So someone's putting mannequins around town with spring, he said finally. The couple next door, Tom and Carol, introduced themselves the first day. It's wearing my uniform, I said, my voice shaking. Tom was tall and broad-shouldered, with gray hair and a polite smile that never quite reached his eyes. You'd be surprised what bored people do. Carol was smaller, just her voice careful, almost apologetic. He left after 10 minutes. Welcome to the neighborhood, I felt worse than before he handed me a plate of cookies. When I got to work that afternoon, the place was unusually quiet. How long they'd lived there. Jake was chopping onions in the kitchen. She said, quickly glancing in the office. Almost 20 years off. I went to hang up my coat and saw something taped to my locker door. They seemed private, and that was fine by me. It showed the back alley behind. We had our own chaos to manage. The same one I'd walked through. 2 young kids, new jobs, and a house that needed more fixing half hidden by shadow. Stood the mannequin. The first few months passed uneventfully. Someone had written under it in red was working long hours at the hardware store he managed. My knees almost gave extra shifts at the clinic. I ripped the photo down and stuffed it into my pocket. I didn't Sometimes tell I'd hear faint music through the wall. That a mannequin was country songs or the buzz of late night take any route home. I like to imagine them slow dancing in their kitchen. Hey, you driving tonight? Holding on to years of quiet routines. Can you give me a ride? Peace, I thought then, finally had a sound. He showed up after closing and steady. I felt stupid. It started on a Thursday night, clutching my bag like it was a late shift and came home early. You sure you're okay? The kids were at my sister's. Liam was closing the store and the house was still. Once I'm home, I made tea, sat on the couch, and for the first time that week let myself exhale music. Then I heard the rain started again. At first I thought it was the TV across the windshield, muffled voices. When we pulled up to my building, I reached for the handle. But then a woman's voice rose, sharp and trembling. Across the street, under the streetlight, stood the mannequin. Then a crash. Jake followed my gaze. What the hell? Before he could finish, the figure toppled forward. Something heavy hitting the floor. Arms bent awkwardly. I stood up, heart hammering. It didn't move again. Should I call someone? Go over. We sat there, silent, I hovered near the wall, listening. The next day, I couldn't face going to work. Then faintly I heard crying. Though Ruby didn't I walked to our front door before I could Jake talk texted me later saying the police had come by the diner asking questions about vandalism. But a faint glow from inside showed a blurred shape moving behind their frosted glass door. Left mannequin limbs scattered everywhere. I wanted to forget it all, but I couldn't. But the shadow every time I closed my eyes, I saw that blank plastic smile. Someone dragging something heavy. I needed answers. I stepped back. So that night I went back to where it started. Carol, I tried again, louder this time. It was just past midnight. Still nothing. Finally, the rain had turned and walked back inside, locking the door behind me. I carried a flashlight. My hand shook as I texted Liam. Probably wouldn't know how something's wrong next door. The alley was silent. He called for the hum of a distant generator. Don't get involved. I swept the light over the walls and graffiti, trash bags. Nothing might be hurt. Until I reached the dumpster. Call the police. There, but don't go over there again. The mannequin. I wanted to argue, but deep down I knew he was right.
Instead, I sat by the window for hours,
curious.
watching the darkened
My
house
name
next
tag
door.
still hung crookedly on
At
its
some
chest.
point, the light in their
and
kitchen
behind it
flipped
written on
off.
the wall in thick black
The
spray
silence
paint.
that followed felt wrong.
I see you, Ellie.
We were both asleep
Something
when the
inside me
pounding
cracked.
started.
Who's
It was so
doing this?
loud it rattled the
I
hallway
shouted, my
pictures.
voice echoing off
I
the
jolted
walls.
upright, heart slamming
What do you
against
want?
my ribs. For a moment,
Who?
nothing. Liam
Then
started
more
grabbing his
footsteps.
phone.
Real ones.
The pounding came again.
A man
frantic,
stepped out from
desperate.
behind the dumpster, tall,
I pulled on
wearing
a robe
hooded
and ran
raincoat.
to the door.
He looked
Through
older,
the glass,
gaunt.
I saw Carol.
I recognized
barefoot,
him.
her nightgown
He'd
torn,
been a customer
eyes
at the
wide with
diner
terror.
weeks ago.
Please.
Always
She
came in
whispered
near
when I
closing,
opened the
always
door.
sat alone.
He's coming. I just wanted to see
For a
you,
second,
he said
I didn't
thundersoft.
understand. You
Then I
always
saw
smiled at
movement
me.
behind her.
Nobody else did.
A man's
My
shadow
stomach
cutting
turned.
across the yard,
You followed me?
illuminated by the streetlight.
He nodded, eyes flicking to the mannequin.
Tom made her for
He was
you.
holding something
so
long
you'd never
and
walk
dark.
alone. I backed
A
up.
wrench, maybe.
You're sick.
Get
lonely.
inside!
I
Then he
shouted,
stepped closer
yanking
and I
Carol
ran.
in.
Liam
I dropped
slammed
the flashlight
door just as Tom's
bolted
fist
down
hit
the
the other
alley,
side,
heart
with a
hammering
deafening
in my
thud.
ears.
The whole frame
I didn't
shuddered.
stop until I was
The
pounding
kids
on a
were
police
crying
station door
upstairs.
10 blocks away.
Liam threw the deadbolt
They caught
and
him
grabbed
that
his
night.
phone. His
Call
name was
911.
Daniel Reeves. Tom hit the door
He'd
again
worked at a
harder this
department
time.
store years ago
The
before
sound
getting
echoed down
fired
the
for
hallway.
theft.
Carol
The
slid to
mannequins
floor,
were left
shaking.
over stock he'd stolen.
He's lost it, she
Repainted,
whispered.
dressed,
He
posed.
thinks I was leaving him.
The police found
The pounding
dozens in a
stopped.
storage unit.
For
he
a
rented
moment,
near
there
the
was
train
only the
yard.
sound of Carol's
He
sobs
told them
in
I
the
was
wind against
special.
the house.
It's been
Then
3 months
footsteps
now.
outside.
Ruby's
retreating.
diner is back
We
to
herded
normal.
the kids into the
Jake
pantry
still
at the
jokes
back
about
of the
Ellie
kitchen
and her
and shut
haunted
the door.
mannequin, but I just smiled.
I pressed my ear to the
I
wood,
quit
listening
taking the
for
alley.
sirens.
I don't
for
even
any
work
sign
the
of
late
him.
shift anymore.
Every
But
second
sometimes
felt like
walking
an hour.
home, I still hear
Finally,
footsteps
the blue
behind
lights
me.
came. I
The
tell
police
myself
found
it's just
Tom
the
a few
echo of my
houses
own.
down, wandering
At least
barefoot,
I
still
hope it is.
clutching the wrench.
Never ignore the
He
unease,
didn't
the
resist.
whispers in your gut.
Carol was
We
taken
grow
to
up
the
learning
hospital.
to be polite. The
To
officers told
second-guess
us
it
it
wasn't
wasn't
the
the
first
first
time
time
neighbors
neighbors
and
danger
her
is
shouting.
coincidence, but no one
But
had ever
instincts
reported
exist
it
for a
reason.
She'd
The
apparently
moment
tried to
something
leave him
feels
that
wrong,
night.
it usually
Packed
is.
a small bag, called a friend for a ride. He'd caught her by the door. When she ran, she'd gone straight to us. The next morning, the house next door was sealed off with tape. An officer came by for a statement, his voice calm but tired. Domestic cases, he said quietly, shaking his head. They're the hardest. You never know what's really happening behind those walls. Liam held my hand while I talked. I could feel his pulse racing through his fingers. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me flinch. I kept hearing her voice and that whisper at our door. He's coming. I started leaving the radio